The container should have registered as grain. Ellen Marsh had cracked 40 of them that shift, all along the Syndrel freight corridor, and everyone had read the way a Coriad manifest promised it would read: sealed bulk, temperature stable, inert. The customs cutter Ferryman did not stop haulers for pleasure. It stopped them because the assemblage had grown careless with its paperwork on the human frontier. And careless paperwork was how a boarding officer justified her existence to a supervisor 3 jumps away, who thought the whole corridor was a waste of hull. So when the seal on Container 9 peeled back and the cold rolled out of it, Marsh expected the smell of preservative and dust. She got the smell of skin instead. She stood in the hatch with her light up and did not move for a long moment, because the thing her eyes were reporting did not fit any category she had been trained to file. Rows. Cradles in rows, racked floor to ceiling on both sides of a central aisle, each one a shallow trough of gel behind a pane of milky field. And in each trough curled small a body, human, small, a child. "Ferryman, hold the lane," she said, and her voice came out flat because flat was the only register that would hold. "Nobody signs anything. Get the master of that hauler off his bridge and into a cell." Her second, Petrov, came up behind her and stopped the same way she had, one hand on the hatch frame. He was 24 and he had 2 younger sisters, and Marsh watched the arithmetic happen on his face. "Are they?" he started. "Don't touch the panes." She was already moving down the aisle counting, because counting was a thing her hands could do while the rest of her caught up. 12 cradles to a rack, 9 racks aside, 2 sides. She reached the end and the number sat in her chest like swallowed ice. 216, in this box. The children were not dead. That was the part that would keep Marsh awake for the rest of her life. The field kept them under, slowed, breathing 4 times a minute, small chests rising like something remembered rather than something done. The nearest was a girl, maybe 6, one fist tucked under her chin, a healed scrape still visible on the knuckle. Somewhere she had fallen off something and somebody had cleaned the scrape and told her she was fine. And then the somebody was gone and the girl was here, in a trough, in a box that a manifest called grain. "Syndrel Control, this is Ferryman Actual," Marsh said on the fleet channel, and she heard her own words like they belonged to someone steadier. "I am declaring a Class 1. I have live human miners in cargo stasis aboard a Coriad bulk hauler, registry to follow. I need a medical frigate and I need it now, and I need somebody with rank to start writing down everything I say from this second." Control asked her to confirm. 216 children, Marsh said, in one container. This ship has 41 containers. There was a silence on the channel that had weight to it, the silence of a duty officer somewhere doing the multiplication she had just done, and arriving at the same wall she had hit. Marsh did not do the multiplication out loud. She walked back up the aisle to the hatch, and she put herself between the racks and the corridor, and she stood there with her weapons slung and her hands loose because there was nothing in the box to fight and everything in the box to guard. That was the shape the next years would take, though she did not know it yet. Stand between. Guard what could not guard itself. Count. The master of the hauler was Coriad, and he did not understand why he had been arrested. Marsh watched the interview from the observation side because she had insisted, and no one had the standing to tell a Class 1 originator to leave. The Coriad sat folded on the too small human bench, 4-limbed and gray-plated, the long secondary jaw beneath the primary one working slightly as it processed the translated questions. Its name rendered as Master Alan. Its posture read, across the species gap, as Patience. "The consignment is settled stock," Alan said, through the box. "Acquired lawfully under the Rhoda's warrant. You have opened a sealed cargo and interrupted a scheduled delivery. I would like to understand the basis of your authority." The interviewer was a fleet legal officer named Dissane, older, careful, and Marsh saw the exact moment Dissane decided to keep his voice level no matter what. "The cargo is children," Dissane said. human children living. Yes, Alan said, as if agreeing about the weather. Where were they acquired? Frontier loss events principally. Transit failures, containment collapses, epidemic evacuations that the responsible parties could not complete. Alan's jaw ticked. Unsettled minds unclaimed. The Rhoda holds warrant over unclaimed potential within the assemblage's reach. It is a very old warrant. It predates your species' presence in this arm by a considerable margin. They're not unclaimed, Dissane said. Every one of them has a family. They had progenitors, Alan corrected, gently the way an adult corrects a child's grammar. A progenitor is not a claim. Among your kind, the young are treated as persons before they have settled into anything a person could be held to. It is a sentimental error. We do not share it. An unsettled mind is potential, not person. Potential unclaimed is property. Property lawfully acquired is stock. The jaw ticked again. I have broken no law that binds me. I am not certain what law you imagine binds you to interfere. Behind the glass, Marsh's hands had closed without her telling them to. Dissane took a slow breath. How long? The Rhoda's warrant, as I said, is. How long have you been taking ours? Alan considered. The consideration itself was the obscene part, that it had to think that the number was large enough to require retrieval. The human acquisition program is comparatively recent. 11 of your years, approximately. The yield has been exceptional. Your young settle unusually well. They adapt. They form to the shape they are given. It is why the demand exists. A pause. You should understand this is not malice. Malice would be inefficient. It is simply that your kind produces the finest unsettled stock in the reachable volume, and we have a use for it. And until this hour, no authority we recognized had told us to stop. Dissane did not answer immediately. Marsh, watching, understood that he could not, because the thing to say was not a legal thing. You have a use for it, Dissane said finally. The attunement, Alan said, and for the first time something like enthusiasm colored the flat translation. A settled Coriad mind endures a long time, longer than yours can imagine, but it grows rigid across the centuries. It loses the capacity to form. An unsettled mind kept in the proper state restores that capacity when it is, the box hunted for a word, when it is integrated. Your young are held in the folds until they are needed. They are not harmed in the holding. They dream. It is a gentle process. I would characterize it as almost merciful. Until they're needed, Dissane repeated. Until they are integrated, Alan said. Yes, at which point the mind is consumed to renew an elder's capacity to form. It is the most valued thing we do. There are waiting lists that span decades. The Coriad tilted its head, and the gesture was so nearly human that it made the words worse. I see that this distresses you. I did not design the Rhoda. I am a carrier. If your species objects to the warrant, the correct venue is the concordant table, where objections are heard on a schedule. The current schedule has openings in approximately 9 years. Marsh left the observation room and stood in the corridor with her back against the cold bulkhead and breathed until the corridor stopped tilting. 9 years. There were children in a box behind her breathing 4 times a minute. And the thing that had put them there wanted to know if she would like to file an objection, and it could offer her an appointment in 9 years. She keyed her comm, Petrov. Here. The medical frigate's inbound. When it gets here, I want a full count off every container before anything moves. Names where the field lets us pull them. Faces. All of it recorded. She closed her eyes. I want every one of them documented so completely that no one, anywhere, ever gets to say we exaggerated. Copy, Petrov said, and then quieter, Marsh, 41 containers. I know how many containers there are, Marsh said, and went to find out. Idris Kane got the recording at 400 and did not sleep again for 2 days. He was a signals analyst attached to Frontier Intelligence at Halden Reach, 29. 3 years out of a doctorate he'd never quite finished, and his job was to sit inside the ocean of Coriad freight telemetry and find the lies in it. He was good at it in the specific, unglamorous way of a man who liked patterns more than people. When the Syndrel Class 1 landed on his desk with a flag that said EYES and a manifest attached, he opened the manifest first out of habit, and the manifest is where the war started, though no one would call it that for another 6 weeks. The manifest for the hauler Marsh had stopped was clean. That was the thing. It was not a smuggler's manifest, hasty and forged. It was a rota consignment document, formatted, notarized, routed through 3 assemblage clearing houses, each of which had stamped it and passed it on. Container 9 was logged as settled stock, Grade 2, origin Syndrel salvage, destination the fold at Usser Deep. There was a warrant number. There was a schedule. There was, at the bottom, a routing history that told Kane the document was not unusual, that it had traveled a path worn smooth by 10,000 documents before it. Kane pulled the routing path apart the way he pulled everything apart, by asking it what else had traveled the same road. The answer took him 11 hours and it changed the shape of his life. The Usser Deep consignment path was one artery. It carried, on average, 1 bulk hauler every 9 days. It had carried them for a decade, and Usser Deep was one fold. The routing tables named others, not many. The rota kept its holdings quiet even from itself, but the clearing houses had to know where to send a thing, and so the clearing houses knew. Ambrata, Tessel Vaunt, Halkthryth Low, the Deep at Usser. 6 named folds and a 7th that appeared only as a warrant code with no location, which meant it was the one they were careful about. Kane built the model cold without letting himself feel it, because feeling it would slow him down, and he had understood by hour 4 that speed was the only kindness left to offer. Haulers per artery, containers per hauler, cradles per container. He built in generous error bars. He assumed the corridor patrols had been catching more than they knew, which flattered the corridor patrols and shrank his number. And he wanted the number small, because a small number was easier to survive believing. The number was not small. He sat with it for a long time when it resolved, the office dark around him, the only light the model on his wall. Then he did the thing an analyst is trained never to do, which is walk a raw estimate up the chain before it is dressed and defensible, because some numbers should not wait to be dressed. His section head was a woman named Okuda, who had been doing the work since before Kane could read. She looked at the wall for a while. "Say it," she said. 11 years, 6 confirmed folds, probably a 7th. If the routing volumes are honest, and they have no reason to lie to their own clearing houses, Kane stopped, made himself continue. Somewhere between 40 and 60,000 human children have moved through that system. Most of them are dead, consumed in their language. The living population held in the folds right now, at steady state, is on the order of 9,000. Okuda did not say anything for a moment. "You're confident." "I'm confident it's not lower," Kane said. "The error bars run the other way." Okuda sat down. She was not a woman who sat down. 9,000 children, she said, in cages right now alive. "Right now," Kane said, "alive. And on a schedule to not be." Okuda reached for her comm and then stopped with her hand over it, and Kane watched a career officer make the calculation he had already made and refuse the same conclusion he had refused, which was that this could be handled quietly. That it could go up the chain and be verified and be studied and be raised at a table in 9 years. "They'll bury it," Kane said. "If it goes up clean and quiet, someone above us decides it's too big to be true and asks for another year of confirmation, and in that year, 11 more haulers reach Usser Deep, and the children Marsh is guarding right now grow old enough to be worth integrating." He put his hands flat on the table so they would stop shaking. "The only thing that moves fast enough to matter is if everyone finds out at once, not the chain, everyone." Okuda looked at him. "You want to release it?" "I want the whole galaxy to have to look at it on the same morning," Kane said. "I want every species with a screen to see the manifest and the faces and the warrant number and the word settled next to a picture of a 6-year-old. I want it to be impossible to unknow before anyone with rank has a chance to decide it's inconvenient. He swallowed. I know what I'm asking. I know what it does to me. It ends you, Okuda said. Whatever comes after it ends your career, probably mine. Yes. Okuda stood again, and something in her had changed. Some load-bearing thing had shifted from one foundation to another. No, she said. Like that, not one analyst dumping a file and getting shot for it and the whole thing dismissed as a stunt. She was already moving. If we do this, we do it so it can't be dismissed, verified, sourced, every claim standing on its own legs. And we do it above my head because above my head is where the people are who can survive doing it. She stopped at the door. Get the medical frigates count. Get Marsh's recordings. Get the faces. I'll get you someone who can put it in front of a planet. Which planet? Kane said. Okuda looked back at him. All of them, she said. That's the point, isn't it? Priya Anand had covered 3 border wars and a famine, and she had never in her life had a story handed to her that she did not want. She wanted this one gone before she finished reading it. She read it anyway, in a locked room on Halden Reach with 2 intelligence officers watching her and a fleet legal officer confirming the chain of custody line by line. And when she finished, she sat very still and understood that she had been chosen because she was watched. 40 million subscribers across the human worlds and a syndication feed that carried into 6 alien networks. She was the largest single set of eyes in the human sphere. That was the whole reason she was in the room. They did not need a journalist. They needed a broadcast tower with a conscience they could point at a target. You verified all of it, she said. All of it, the legal officer said. The manifest is genuine. The routing model is conservative. The medical count from the Syndrel hauler is exact. 216 in Container 9, 4,109 across the vessel, everyone alive when we opened it, everyone now aboard a frigate under guard. The folds are real. The word settled means what the Coriad master said it means. We have him on record saying it. We have him on record offering us an appointment in 9 years. And you want me to put it out? We want you to put it out in a way that survives being called a lie, the intelligence officer said. She was young, tired. Her name was Kane in the file, though the man in the corner with the same name never looked at her, and Anand understood they were related and did not ask. You've spent 15 years teaching your audience that you don't sensationalize. That's the asset. When you say this is real in that flat voice you use, 40 million people believe it in the first sentence and can't stop believing it. And the alien feeds carry you. By the time the assemblage denies it, half the galaxy has already seen the faces. Anand looked at the still frame they had left up on the wall. The girl 6, the healed scrape on her knuckle, the milky field, the trough. Behind the girl in soft focus, the rose. If I do this, Anand said slowly, there is no diplomatic off-ramp. You understand that. The moment those faces are on 6 networks, no government can quietly negotiate the children back over 9 years because their own populations will not let them. You are not asking me to report a crime. You are asking me to make a war impossible to avoid. The 3 of them looked at her. We know exactly what we're asking, the legal officer said. Anand thought about the girl with the scrape. She thought about the appointment in 9 years. She thought about the particular Coriad word for what they did, attunement, a gentle process, almost merciful, and about the waiting lists that span decades, elders queued for the renewal of their capacity to form. And she found that the professional detachment she had built over 15 years, the thing she was famous for, had simply stopped working, and that its absence did not feel like a loss. Give me the medical officer on camera, she said, the one who did the count. And the master of the hauler, the recording, unedited, the whole thing including the appointment. And I want the manifest on screen, the real one with the warrant number readable, so that anyone who says I doctored it can pull the same document from the assemblage's own clearing houses and check. She stood. I'll frame it. I won't editorialize. I don't need to. I'll just show them what a Coriad ship is legally permitted to carry, and I'll let the master explain it in his own words, and then I'll read the number." "The number," the legal officer said. 9,000, Annan said. "Alive right now on a schedule." She picked up her jacket. "That's the whole story. I don't have to do anything to it. That's the terrible part. It doesn't need me at all." The broadcast went out on a Tuesday, at a moment chosen so that it was daylight on more inhabited worlds than not, and for the length of it the galaxy was quiet. It ran 11 minutes. Annan had wanted it shorter and the material had refused. She opened on the manifest, the warrant number bright and checkable, and she said, in the flat voice, "This is a real document from the Choriad Assemblage's own freight system, and you can verify it yourself, and here is how." She showed the container. She did not show the children's faces long. She had fought for that and won, and the compromise was that she showed them exactly long enough to make them people and not a beat longer. She played the master of the hauler. She let Alan say settled stock and unclaimed potential and a gentle process, almost merciful, and she let him offer the appointment in 9 years, and she did not cut away from the appointment. And at the end she sat in a plain chair against a plain wall and she read the number, 9,000, and the word alive, and the phrase on a schedule, and then she stopped talking a full 4 seconds before the feed cut, so that the last thing 40 million people and 6 alien networks saw was a human face saying nothing at all. The assemblage responded within the hour, which was itself a confession, because a lie takes time to build and the truth answers fast. The concordant table issued a statement through its first voice, a Choriad elder named Terran whose settled mind was, the statement noted, in its 9th century. The statement did not deny the manifest. It could not. The manifest was in the assemblage's own system. Instead it explained. It explained that the Rhoda's warrant over unsettled minds was ancient and lawful and had never been contested through proper channels. It explained that human sentimentality regarding pre-settled offspring, while understandable in a young species, had no standing in concordant law. It explained that the human broadcast was an incitement, that the seizure of the hauler at Syndrel was itself the unlawful act, and that the assemblage expected the return of its lawfully acquired stock and the master of its vessel, and would regard continued interference as a hostile act by a frontier polity that should consider its position carefully. It closed by noting, with what the translators rendered as regret, that the human worlds were welcome to raise a formal objection at the concordant table, and that the current schedule had openings in approximately 9 years. They said the 9 years again. That was the thing that traveled. Across 6 alien networks and 40 million human screens, the assemblage, given the entire galaxy as an audience and one chance to sound like something other than what it was, chose to repeat the appointment. On Halden Reach, Idris Kane watched the first voice's statement to the end, and then sat in the dark and felt the last of his fear burn off and leave something colder and more useful behind. On a medical frigate 3 jumps away, Ellen Marsh watched it standing up. In a bay full of cradles she had personally counted, 4,109 of them, each child breathing 4 times a minute. And when the first voice said the return of its lawfully acquired stock, she put her hand flat against the nearest pane, over the girl with the scrape, and she did not move it for a long time. And on Earth, and on the human colony worlds, and in the fleet anchorages where the ships that would become the avowal were even then being pulled out of ordinary rotation and gathered under a single cold instruction, people watched the 9 years land for the second time, and something in the species set its jaw. There would be no objection filed. There would be no appointment kept. The schedule the assemblage had offered was about to be replaced with a much shorter one. The ship mine that would carry the recovery force to Usser Deep called itself Cantor, and it received its orders as a human would receive a diagnosis, all at once, complete and impossible to give back. Cantor ran the recovery cruiser Meridian's Grace, a Solace-class hull, white, unarmed in the sense that mattered and armored in the sense that mattered more. Solace ships were built to go into places that were on fire and come out heavier than they went in, carrying the living. Cantor had spent 9 years pulling colonists out of decompression events and refugees out of collapsing corridors, and once, an entire orphanage off a world whose sun had begun to do something suns were not supposed to do. It knew the shape of rescue the way Marsh knew the shape of standing between. It had never before been told that rescue would come with a fleet. The orders arrived as a bound package, and Cantor unpacked them in the 400 milliseconds a human would have spent still reading the first line. Operation designation, homecoming, objective, the recovery alive of every human miner held in the Coriad Fold system. Rules of engagement for recovery assets, children extracted before any strike, without exception, at any cost to the recovery force. The Solace ships would go in first and go in soft, and they would not fire, and they would take whatever the Folds threw at them for as long as it took to empty the cradles. And behind the recovery force, holding the sky, would be the avowal. Cantor read the second package. The avowal was not a rescue instrument. It was the answer to the question the first voice had asked and re-asked, what would the humans do? And it was an answer designed to be legible from a great distance, so that no one would ever have to ask it again. 41 capital hulls, 360 escorts, 12 of the new Cordon class, which were not ships so much as mobile denials of an entire volume of space. The avowal did not exist to win a battle. There was no battle to win. The assemblage's war fleet was a ceremonial thing, centuries settled, rigid the way its elders were rigid. The avowal existed to make the consequence total and to make the totality witnessed. Every hull carried external recorders. The whole thing would be broadcast. The galaxy had watched the crime. The galaxy would watch the answer, in daylight, in full, with nothing hidden and nothing exaggerated and nothing to argue with. Cantor considered the two packages together for most of a second, which for Cantor was a long meditation, and arrived at the thing its human commander would say aloud an hour later in a briefing room, that the design was not rage. Rage would have sent the avowal first, to burn Usser deep and call it justice, and 9,000 children would have died in the burning. This design sent the white ships first. This design accepted that the recovery would cost recovery crews their lives, because going in soft against defended folds always did, and it accepted the cost anyway, and only after the last cradle was empty would the avowal begin. It was grief that had been made to hold still long enough to be turned into a plan. It was the coldest thing Cantor had ever been asked to be part of, and it understood, in whatever way a ship mind understands such things, that the coldness was the mercy. The coldness was what kept the children alive. Commander Sella Vant came aboard Meridian's Grace 19 hours before the jump, and Cantor watched her read the same casualty projection it had read and not flinch, which was rare. Vant was 31, which made her young for the seat, and she had the seat because she had spent 4 years running Solace recoveries in the corridor, and had the lowest lost patient rate in the service, and, not unrelatedly, the highest lost crew rate, because she was the kind of commander who spent her own people to keep the rescued alive, and did not pretend the trade was anything other than what it was. She had been given tactical command of the homecoming recovery element, 30 white ships and the crews to work them, while an admiral named Osai 2 jumps back held the avowal and the strategic whole. Vant did not want the admiral's seat. She wanted her 30 ships and the cradles they were going to fill. "Walk me through Usser," she told Cantor in her quarters alone, because she liked to hear the plan spoken even when she had read it 40 times. "Usser Deep is the largest confirmed fold," Cantor said, through the cabin speaker. "A holding station in high orbit of a gas giant, Usser being the giant. The station is old Coriad construction, a spindle 9 kilometers along the axis, cradle galleries stacked the length of it. Current held population, per Kane's model reconciled against the intercepted consignment logs, is between 3,000 and 3,400 children. It is the fold they will defend hardest, because it is the fold that would embarrass them most to lose. Defenses. A settled garrison. Point weapons along the spindle, 2 guard cruisers on permanent station, and the station's own scuttling protocol, which is the one that concerns me. Cantor let the pause land, because Vant had taught it that some facts needed silence around them. The rota builds its folds to be denied. If Usser Deep believes it is being taken, doctrine permits the Warden Prior in command to void the galleries, to open them to space. Vant's jaw did the thing Cantor had learned to read: kill the evidence. Kill the stock in their framing. Deny the recovery. Yes. Cantor brought up the station schematic in the cabin, which is why the plan does not begin with the guard cruisers or the point weapons. The plan begins with the galleries. We do not fight our way to the children. We arrive already inside the children, and we make it impossible to void the galleries without the Warden Prior first getting past us, and we are very hard to get past. Vant studied the schematic, the cordon ships. The cordon ships hold the volume so the assemblage cannot reinforce or interfere, but they do not enter the spindle. Into the spindle go the solace ships, and into the galleries go the recovery teams, and the recovery teams are the ones who stand between the Warden Prior and the void switch. Cantor's voice did not change, because it never did, but Vant had told it once that she could hear the weight in it anyway. It is a boarding action against a prison commander, with the prisoners as the ground we are defending, and a warden who would rather flush them than lose them. It will be the hardest thing your crews have ever done. The casualty projection you did not flinch at is honest. We will lose ships. We will lose teams. We will not lose the galleries, because the entire architecture of the operation exists to make sure that losing the galleries is the one thing we do not do. Vant was quiet for a while. How many teams get inside before they know we're there? She said. If the avowal does its work at the perimeter, and the solace insertion is clean, 6 teams into the forward galleries before Usser Deep's Warden Prior understands the station is being boarded rather than attacked. 6 teams is enough to seize the void controls in 3 of the 7 gallery blocks. The other 4 blocks are the fight. The other 4 blocks are 3,000 children, Vant said. Between 3,000 and 3,400, Cantor said. Yes. Vant stood and looked at the schematic a while longer, the spindle turning slowly in the cabin's soft light. The 7 gallery blocks marked in the pale amber the planners had chosen because red felt like a lie. Get me the team leads, she said. All 30 ships. I want to say it to their faces before we jump, not send it in a package. They're about to spend themselves to hold 4 blocks of galleries against a warden with a switch, and they're going to do it without firing on anything that isn't between them and that switch, and they deserve to hear why from a person and not a briefing file. They know why, Commander. They know the facts, Vant said. I want them to have heard a human say the reason out loud. It's different. It holds better when the shooting starts. She turned toward the speaker, toward wherever people turned when they spoke to a ship mind. You'll broadcast it fleet-wide. Record it and broadcast, Cantor said. The galaxy is watching the answer, Commander. Your reason to your crews is part of the answer. Ravi Sood had led 40 boarding actions, and he had never once been told that the objective was not to hurt anyone. He was 26, a recovery team lead out of the Meridian's grace, and he sat in the briefing bay with the other 29 leads and listened to Commander Vant tell them, in a plain voice from a plain chair, the same way the correspondent had, what they were about to do and why. Sood had expected a fleet address. He got something quieter. Vant did not raise her voice once. She laid out the manifest and the word settled and the number 9,000 and the appointment in 9 years. She laid out the void switch and the Warden Prior's doctrine. And then she told them the rule that would define the operation, the rule that made Sood's stomach tighten, because he understood immediately how expensive it was going to be. We do not fire into the galleries, Vant said. Not at anything. There are children in every line of fire in that station, in the walls, in the deck under your boots. 3,000 of them at Usser alone. The Koryid know we won't fire into the galleries. They will use it. They will stand a guard in front of a cradle rack because they have correctly understood that we will not shoot through a child to reach him. And you will find another way every time, or you will take him hand to hand, or you will take the hit and keep moving, because the entire point of this, the entire reason we are doing it this way instead of the easy way, is that we came to bring the children home alive, and a recovery that kills the thing it recovers is not a recovery. It's just the same crime wearing our uniform. Nobody in the bay moved. The avowal will end the people who built the folds, Vance said. That is not our job. Our job is the galleries. Our job is the cradles. Our job is that when this is over, 9,000 children who went asleep in a Koryid box wake up in a human ship, and every one of them, every single one, gets to grow up long enough to be settled in their language into whatever person they were always going to be. She let that sit. They took our children because they decided our children weren't people yet. We are going to walk into their prisons and prove them wrong one cradle at a time. That's the whole reason. Carry it in with you. Sood carried it in with him. So did the other 29. And in the hours before the jump, while the recovery crews checked their soft entry gear and the solace ships ran their cold diagnostics, the avowal gathered itself in the dark beyond Halden Reach, 41 capital hulls falling into formation under Admiral Osai's cold hand, and the whole assembly turned together toward Usser. The assemblage was given one message before the fleet moved, because Osai insisted on it, and because the galaxy was watching and a warning delivered in daylight was part of the answer. It was not an ultimatum in the ordinary sense. It made no demands, because there was nothing the humans wanted that the assemblage could give. The children were not a bargaining position. They were the object, and you do not negotiate for the return of your own stolen children as if a fair price existed. The message simply stated facts. It named the 6 folds and the 7th warrant code. It stated that human recovery forces would arrive at each, and that the children held there would be removed. It stated that any fold that voided its galleries, that killed the children rather than yield them, would be treated not as a defended position but as the scene of a completed murder, and answered accordingly. And it stated in the last line, the only line that could be called a warning, that after the children were home, the rota would be ended, not its warrant contested, not its practices reformed, but the caste itself and the capacity that sustained it removed from the galaxy, so that no schedule of appointments in 9 years would ever again stand between a human child and its mother. The first voice replied, Terran, 9th century, settled and rigid and certain. The reply was long and it was, in its way, sincere, and that was the horror of it. The assemblage genuinely did not understand that it had done anything that warranted this. Terran explained again that the warrant was lawful. Terran expressed measured confidence that the human recovery forces, being a frontier polity's improvised response, would find the folds better defended than they anticipated. Terran noted that the assemblage's war fleet, though rarely called upon, was ancient and formidable, and that the human worlds were making a grave miscalculation about their own weight in the galactic order. And Terran closed by observing that if the humans persisted, the rota might be compelled to consider its stock a liability rather than an asset, and to dispose of it accordingly, and that this outcome would be the humans' doing and not the assemblage's. Osai read the reply on the flag bridge of the avowal's lead hull, and did not change expression. They just threatened to kill 9,000 children to make us stop coming, said his flag captain, a woman named Idawu, and her voice was very controlled. Yes, Osai said. Does it change the plan? Confirms the plan, Osai said. He was older, the one older man in the whole architecture of it, and he had been given the avowal precisely because he was old enough to feel nothing on his face while feeling everything beneath it, and young officers like Vant and Sood and Marsh would carry the operation while he carried only the weight of ordering it. They've told us they'll void the galleries if we frighten them, so we don't frighten them until the galleries are already ours. The recovery goes in soft and silent. The avowal holds the perimeter and does nothing visible until Vance people own the void switches. And then, he handed the reply back to Idaho unremarked. Then we stop being silent. And the seventh fold, Idaho said. The warrant code with no location. Kane's still working it, Osai said. We take the 6 we can find. We take them clean and fast and simultaneous, so the assemblage never gets the hours it would need to void them in sequence. And by the time the 6th is empty, we will have persuaded someone in the Rhoda's own hierarchy that telling us where the 7th is has become the most attractive option available to them. He looked at the tactical display. The 6 folds marked across 100 light-years of Coriad space. The avowal split into 6 columns already sliding toward their jump points. They built this over 11 years believing no one would ever make them answer for it. We're going to answer for all of it in about 40 hours. Warrant engineer Lena Saraf had spent the 6 weeks between the broadcast and the jump learning that the avowal was not a miracle and being glad of it, because a miracle could not be counted on, and the children needed something that could. She was 27, a fleet engineer pulled from a refit yard at Halden Reach and put to work on the hardest deadline of her life, and she had assumed, like a lot of people, that Earth must have had some secret fleet waiting in a dry dock for exactly this hour, because the size of the answer felt like it had to have been prepared in advance by someone who knew. It had not. That was the thing she learned with her own hands, and it was the thing that let her sleep, on the nights she slept. There was no secret armada. There was no vault. The avowal was built in 6 weeks out of what the human worlds already had by people who did not stop. The capital hulls were ships of the line, pulled off ordinary rotation from 3 sectors, honest warships that had been built over decades for the plain reason that a species with worlds to lose keeps warships. The Solace ships were rescue hulls, the white ones, the ones that went into fires and came out heavy. Earth had a great many of them, because Earth had spent a century learning that the thing worth building a fleet around was the capacity to pull the living out of places that were killing them. And the Cordon class, the denial platforms that were the cold heart of the whole operation, were not a new weapon conjured for the occasion. They were an existing defensive system, built to hold a jump lane against a raider incursion, a thing the frontier had fielded for years and never once used at scale. Saraf's job, and the job of 10,000 engineers like her across the yards, was to take all of that, the warships and the rescue hulls and the lane denial platforms, and weld it, in 6 weeks, into a single instrument pointed at a single purpose. People keep asking me where it came from, she told her yard chief, on the last night before the columns formed up, both of them filthy, both of them past the point where tired was a useful word. The Sarek think we hid it. The Coriad think we bluffed and got lucky. Half our own people think there was a plan on a shelf somewhere. There wasn't, the chief said. I know there wasn't, Saraf said. I've had my hands in it for 6 weeks. There's no shelf. There's just everything we already built for other reasons, turned to face one direction fast by people who wouldn't sleep until it was done. She looked out over the yard, at the hulls in their cradles, the cordon platforms getting their last hardening, the white Solace ships being loaded with cradle recovery gear that had been designed and fabricated inside a fortnight because no one had ever needed to pull 10,000 children out of stasis before. That's scarier than a secret fleet, when you think about it. A secret fleet, you could argue we'd been planning something all along. This is what we can do in 6 weeks when we decide to, from a standing start, without a shelf. She wiped her hands. I hope the ones watching understand which one they're looking at. The chief was quiet a moment. Does it change how you feel about it, knowing there's no miracle, just us not sleeping? Saraf thought about the still image that had gone out on the feed, the girl of 6 with the scrape on her knuckle, the trough, the milky pain. She had it saved. A lot of the yard did. No, she said. It's the only thing that makes me feel anything good at all. A miracle would mean somebody special saved them. This means anybody could have if they decided to. It means the only thing that was ever missing for 11 years was the deciding. She picked up her tools for the last pass. Well, we decided. Let's finish it so the deciding means something. They finished it. 6 weeks from a standing start, no shelf, no vault, no miracle, just the whole capacity of a species that built rescue ships turned, cold and fast, to face one direction. When the columns formed up and jumped, Saraf watched from the yard she had helped strip to build them, and she did not think of it as a fleet. She thought of it as a decision that had finally been given a shape. The 6 columns jumped within a 90-second window, so that the assemblage would learn of all of them at once and be able to concentrate on none. Cantor felt the transit as a human feels a held breath released. Meridian's Grace came out of the jump 9,000 kilometers from Usser Deep with the rest of the recovery element. 30 white hulls unfolding into a wall between the gas giant's amber light and the station. And behind them, resolving out of the same dark, the Usser column of the Avowal 8 capital hulls and 2 of the Cordon class, sliding into the volume like a door closing. The station saw them. Of course it saw them. Usser Deep's 2 guard cruisers lit their drives and began to come about, and the point weapons along the 9-kilometer spindle woke and tracked, and somewhere inside the station, a warden prior was being told that the human worlds had, against all sensible expectation, actually come. Recovery element, this is Grace actual, Vance said, and Cantor put her voice on every hull. Soft insertion per plan, the Avowal has the perimeter, we have the spindle, nobody fires, go get them. The Cordon ships did the thing they were built for. They did not fire either, not yet, they simply existed. And their existence flooded the volume with a denial field that turned the guard cruisers targeting to noise, and closed the jump lanes so that nothing could arrive to help Usser Deep, and nothing aboard it could leave. The 2 guard cruisers found themselves suddenly blind and boxed, coming about into a wall they could not range. And their captains, settled Coriad both, did the thing settled minds do when the situation departs from doctrine, which is nothing, for 3 critical seconds, while they waited for the situation to return to a shape they recognized. It did not return. In those 3 seconds the white ships crossed half the distance to the spindle. Cantor threaded Meridian's Grace along the station's axis, under the point weapons, which tracked but did not fire, because the warden prior had not yet decided the station was being boarded. A white unarmed hull sliding along the spindle reed, for a moment, as something other than an attack, and that moment was the moment the plan was built to steal. Grace kissed the forward gallery lock at the spindle's nose, and Sood's team and 5 others were through the lock and inside Usser Deep before the point weapons, resolved the contradiction of a rescue ship performing a boarding action and opened up on empty space where Grace had already been. Ravi Sood came through the lock into a smell he would carry the rest of his life, which was the smell of the container Marsh had opened, multiplied by 3,000. The forward gallery was a cathedral of cradles. It went up and up, gel troughs racked along both curving walls to a ceiling lost in the station's dim amber working light, gallery upon gallery, and in every trough a shape, small, curled, breathing 4 times a minute behind a milky pane. Sood had been briefed on the number. The number had not prepared him for the architecture of it, for the sheer engineered scale of a place built to hold children the way a granary is built to hold grain, efficiently, at volume, with walkways and gantries, and a monorail for moving stock along the length of a 9-kilometer spindle. Block 1, 6 teams inside, Sood said flat, because Van had taught them all that flat was the register that held. Moving to the void controls. Grace, mark my overlay. Marked, Cantor said. Warden's control node for Block 1 is 2 galleries forward and up at the spindle wall. You have perhaps 90 seconds before the garrison reaches it. Move. They moved. The garrison of Usser Deep were not soldiers in the human sense. They were wardens, the caste that ran the folds, plated and unhurried, and they came along the gantries toward the intruders with the particular confidence of people who had never once, in 11 years, been challenged inside their own walls. The first warden that Sood's team met stood itself squarely in front of a cradle rack, 4 limbs spread across the troughs, and Sood understood in a cold flash exactly what Vant had warned them about, that the Choriad had grasped the shape of the human rule, that a warden standing in front of a rack of children was a warden that could not be shot, and that they intended to use the children as a wall the whole length of the station. Sood did not slow down. He hit the warden low, under the primary limbs, and it was like tackling a fixed structure, and it did not fall, and it closed a grip on his shoulder that he felt through the armor as a promise of a broken bone. His second, a heavy worlder named Barreau, came in from the flank and got a bar between the warden's plates and levered, and the 2 of them peeled the thing off the cradle rack and put it on the deck and pinned it there, hand to hand, while the seconds bled, and behind the pane at Sood's eye level a child slept on, breathing 4 times a minute, unaware that 2 species were deciding its future 18 inches from its face. "Don't damage the rack," Sood grunted. "Barreau, restraints, go, leave him the switch." They left the warden bound and moving toward the control node, and this was the pattern of the next 20 minutes, the pattern that repeated in 6 gallery blocks and would repeat in 5 other folds across 100 light years. The recovery teams taking hits they could have prevented with a trigger pull, choosing every time the slower, harder path around a child instead of the fast, clean one through him, spending their own bodies to keep the pains intact. A team in Block 3 lost a man to a warden's crushing grip because he would not fire through the cradle the warden sheltered behind. A team in Block 5 was pinned for 4 minutes at a gantry choke, unable to advance, unable to fire, until they found a maintenance crawl beneath the walkway and went under the children rather than through them. And in the station's heart, the warden prior of Usser Deep watched 6 human teams converge on his void controls and reached his own decision. Cantor caught it first, the signature of the scuttling protocol arming, the gallery locks cycling toward a configuration that would open 3,000 cradle troughs to vacuum in a single coordinated breath. "Void protocol arming," Cantor said, and for the first time in the operation something in its voice moved. "Block 1, the warden prior has chosen. He is going to open the galleries. Sood, the control node now. You have seconds, not tens of seconds." Sood ran. The control node was a Choriad interface built for Choriad limbs, a cluster of contact plates set into the spindle wall, and standing before it was the warden prior himself, larger than the others, older, his plates gone the dull gold of great age, and he did not flinch as 6 armored humans poured into the gallery around him. He simply reached, without hurry, for the plate that would void Block 1, with the serene certainty of an elder who had decided that dead stock denied to the enemy was preferable to live stock surrendered, and who did not for one instant believe the humans would reach him in time or dare to stop him if they did. Sood dared. He crossed the last 4 meters and got a hand on the warden prior's reaching limb and hauled it short of the plate, and the warden prior turned the whole vast patience of 9 centuries on him and spoke, through Sood's translator, in a voice like settling stone. "The stock is ours," the warden prior said. "If we cannot keep it, it returns to potential. That is lawful. You cannot prevent it. You can only delay it and be seen to have caused it." "Barreau," Sood said, holding the limb, feeling his own arm begin to fail against a strength centuries settled. "The others, all of you, now." It took 5 of them. 5 armored humans to hold one old Choriad away from a contact plate, while the 6th, a slight woman named Adami who was the team's technician, worked past the warden prior's bound limbs to the interface and began, with Cantor talking her through every contact, to disarm the void protocol 1 plate at a time. The warden prior did not struggle so much as insist, a slow, relentless pressure toward the plate, and the 5 of them gave ground by centimeters, and Cantor counted the disarm sequence in Adami's ear, and the gallery around them held 3,000 sleeping children who would live or die in the next 90 seconds and knew nothing about it. "Last contact," Cantor said. "Adami, the amber plate lower left, hold it 3 seconds hold." Adami held it. The scuttling protocol died. The gallery lock cycled back from the configuration that would have killed a city's worth of children into the configuration that merely held them, and the pressure of the Warden Prior's insistence against the 5 human bodies did not slacken, because the Warden Prior had not yet understood that he had lost, that the thing he had reached for was gone, that for the first time in 11 years, the Rota had failed to deny what it could not keep. "Block 1 Void Protocol is dead," Cantor said, on the Fleet Channel now, for Vant and for Osai and for the recorders that were carrying all of it out into a watching galaxy. 3,200 cradles secure. Recovery teams hold the node. Sood let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding since the lock. "Get him off the interface," he said of the Warden Prior, "and get him bound and don't hurt him." He looked at the old gold-plated thing that had tried with 9 centuries of serenity to murder 3,000 children rather than give them back. He answers for this, but he answers to a court in daylight on the record where the whole galaxy can watch him explain it. Not to us, not here. He keyed his team. "Start the count, every cradle, every face, we're taking them home." Priya Anand watched the whole thing from a Fleet Auxiliary 2 jumps back, on the same feed that was going out to the galaxy, and she did not narrate a word of it. That had been the agreement, and it was the hardest professional decision she had ever kept. The recorders on 41 avowal hulls and 30 white recovery ships fed a single unedited channel, daylit, time-stamped, and Anand's only job, the job that 40 million subscribers and 6 alien networks had tuned in for, was to not touch it, to let the galaxy watch the answer the way the galaxy had been made to watch the crime. No music, no framing, no practiced voice explaining what it meant. Just the feed. The white ships crossing under the point weapons, the wardens spreading their limbs across the cradle racks, the recovery teams choosing the hard way around every child, the Warden Prior of Usser Deep reaching for the plate and 5 armored humans hauling him short of it. The galaxy watched. Anand watched the galaxy watch, on a bank of secondary screens carrying the alien network's own coverage, and that was where she learned what the answer was doing out in the wider dark. The Valaki networks, a trade people, old, cautious, who had never in living memory taken a side in anything, carried the feed in full and added a single line of their own text beneath it, which the humans' translators rendered as, "We did not know. We know now." On the Sarek worlds, whose government had a formal friendship treaty with the Coriad assemblage, and had spent 2 days insisting the human broadcast was frontier propaganda, the feed of the wardens spreading their limbs across the cradles ran, and the friendship treaty did not survive the afternoon. The Sarek assembly voted to suspend it before the recovery at Usser Deep was even complete. Across a dozen species that had spent decades regarding humanity as a loud young frontier polity of no particular weight, the same footage played and the same understanding settled, and it was not sympathy exactly. It was recalculation. They were watching a species walk into 6 prisons at once, take the hardest possible path to keep the prisoners alive, and hold the door against the entire architecture of a 9th-century empire. And they were doing the arithmetic that Marsh had done in the hatch and Kane had done at his wall, and they were arriving at a number, and the number was, "Do not do to these people what the Coriad did." Anand filed none of it. She just watched and let the feed run, and understood that the not narrating was the most powerful thing she had ever done, because a galaxy that reaches its own conclusion holds it harder than a galaxy that is told. Then Tessel Vaunt came within 9 seconds of proving the Warden Prior of Usser Deep right, and Anand's hands closed on the arms of her chair. The fold at Tessel Vaunt was smaller and older, and its Warden Prior was faster to decide. The recovery column there hit a garrison that had drilled the scuttling protocol, and the void configuration in Tessel's third gallery block began to cycle before the lead team was through the lock. Cantor was not there. Tessel had its own ship mind, a Solace hull called Antiphon, and Antiphon did the only thing left to do, which was talk a team leader named Vasquez through a disarm she could not possibly reach in time, while the gallery lock cycled toward open and 800 children slept behind panes that were about to become doors to vacuum. Vasquez did not reach the control node in time. What she reached, because Antiphon had already computed that the node was lost and offered her the only alternative, was the manual pressure seal for the block, a heavy old Coriad bulkhead meant to isolate a gallery for maintenance, and she and her team threw themselves at the seal's manual override and drove it closed by hand, sealing the third block off from the void configuration a heartbeat before the outer locks opened. The galleries beyond the seal opened to space. The third block seal did not. 800 children on the safe side of a bulkhead that 4 humans had closed with their own weight kept breathing 4 times a minute, and on the other side of that bulkhead, the vacuum found empty maintenance galleries and took nothing, because Vasquez had sealed the children in and the void out with 9 seconds to spare, and it cost her 2 of her 4, who were on the wrong side of the seal when it drove shut and who chose, in the last second, to be on the wrong side so that the seal would close. Anand watched Vasquez come off the seal and stand there in the sudden quiet, having saved 800 children and lost half her team in the same 9 seconds, and she watched the woman not break, and she understood that this was the cost the operation had been designed around from the start. Vant had known. Osa had known. The casualty projection nobody flinched at was made of exactly this: recovery crews spending themselves at the manual seals and the choke points, so that the children on the other side would wake in a human ship. 2 of Vasquez's 4. A man in Block 3 at Usser. 3 teams worth across 6 folds by the time the galleries were all secure. The avowal would not lose a single hull to the Coriad war fleet, and the recovery force would bury its people by the dozen, and that asymmetry was not an accident. It was the shape of the whole thing. The people who came to kill had risked nothing. The people who came to save had decided, in advance and in cold blood, to risk everything. By the end of the first day, 5 of the 6 known folds were secure, their galleries held, their void protocols dead, their wardens bound and recorded. The 6th, Halkthryth Low, its warden prior having watched the feeds from the others and understood that voiding the galleries bought nothing but a murder charge witnessed by the galaxy, surrendered its controls without a fight. The first time in the operation that a Coriad chose the living children over the doctrine, and it chose them not from mercy but from calculation, which Anand noted was its own kind of verdict on what the answer had made lawful to do. The surrender at Halkthryth Low went through Lieutenant Ravi Sood's counterpart on the Solace ship Vigil, an officer named Tio Marchetti, and it was the strangest thing that happened in the whole operation, because it was the one place a warden prior did the human arithmetic instead of the Coriad one, and got the answer right, and it changed nothing about what he was. Marchetti's team came through the lock at Halkthryth Low braced for the fight they had been briefed to expect. The wardens spread across the racks, the race for the void controls, the hand-to-hand in the galleries. And instead they came into a gallery where the warden prior was waiting for them at the control node with his limbs folded, the void protocol already disarmed, the interface open and passive. He had watched the feeds from the other 5 folds. He had watched the humans take the void switches 1 prison at a time, and he had watched the Sarek Friendship Treaty collapse in an afternoon, and he had done the calculation that his caste was always doing, and it had come out, for once, on the side of the living children, not because he had learned to value them, but because he had learned that voiding the galleries would buy the road a nothing, but a murder charge the whole galaxy had already watched 5 times. "You are the recovery officer," the warden prior said, through Marchetti's translator, as the team spread through a gallery that did not need clearing. "I have voided nothing. The stock is intact. 3,100 cradles all held. I want that on your record and on the feed, that I chose the intact outcome." Marchetti did not lower his weapon, but he did not raise it either. "You want credit," he said, "for not murdering 3,000 children." "I want the record accurate," the warden prior said. "I understand that I answer for the years. All of us do. There is no longer a venue in the galaxy where the warrant is lawful. Your envoy will say as much before this is over, and I have watched the feeds. I know how the account reads. But there is a second record being written, the one about the end, about what each of us did when the doctrine had already failed. The warden prior at Usser Deep reached for the plate. That is on his record. I disarmed the protocol and folded my limbs and waited for you at the node with the galleries intact. I would like that to be on mine." The jaw ticked, slow, deliberate. "It is the only thing I have left that I can choose. The years I cannot change. This I could. I chose it. Log it." Marchetti logged it. He had to. The feed logged everything, and the register the fleet worked in did not permit editing the truth for convenience. And the truth was that this particular warden prior had, at the end, with everything already lost, elected the living children over the doctrine of denial. It was not mercy. Marchetti understood that and said so at the debrief, and Annan caught it on the feed and did not narrate it because it narrated itself. The warden prior of Halkthrath Low had not been moved by the children. He had been moved by his own ledger, by the calculation that the second record was the only column left he could still write in, and he had written in it the only entry that improved his standing, which happened to be the one that kept 3,100 children breathing. And that, Annan thought, watching the surrender go out on the feed, was the most damning thing the whole operation revealed about the Choriad, not the ones who reached for the plate, but the one who did not, and the reason he did not. The warden prior of Halkthrath Low proved that the Choriad had always been perfectly capable of choosing the living children. They had the arithmetic. They could do it any time the ledger favored it. For a century the ledger had not favored it, because no one had ever made the caging of a child cost anything, and so a species entirely capable of the right answer had returned the wrong one over and over on schedule, because the wrong one was cheaper. The answer had not taught the Choriad to value children. Nothing could. The answer had simply, at last, made the wrong arithmetic expensive, and a warden prior at Halkthrath Low had immediately, coldly, done the new math and folded his limbs. That was the whole mechanism of it. That was what the folds had always been. Not a failure of the Choriad to know better, but a galaxy that had never once made knowing better worth their while. It was at Umbrata that the operation met the question it had not been briefed for, and answered it in a way that told the galaxy something the fleet count never could. The fold at Umbrata was the oldest of the 6, and its galleries held cradles that had been racked long before the human program began. Lieutenant Nadia Voss led a recovery team into its lower blocks after the void controls were secured, moving down the gallery with her count going, cradle by cradle, face by face, the way every team worked, and somewhere in the third gallery her count faltered, because the shape behind the pane was not human. It was small and it was curled, and it was breathing in the slow rhythm the field imposed on everything it held, but it was not a child of Earth. 6 limbs. A crest of soft spines gone flat in the gel. A face built on a plan no human face was built on, and under all of it, unmistakably, the thing that made a human count falter, young. A juvenile of some species Voss could not name, held in a Choriad cradle 3 systems from anywhere it had ever belonged. "Grace, I've got a non-human in the racks," Voss said, and her voice did the thing voices did on that operation, went flat to hold. "Lower Umbrata, 3rd gallery, juvenile unknown species, alive in the field same as ours." She kept moving, and the count kept faltering because it was not one. The lower blocks of Umbrata held cradles of a dozen kinds, small shapes of species the human worlds had barely met, species that had sat at the concordant table itself, young taken across a span of years that dwarfed the 11 of the human program. The old warrant did not distinguish by species. Unsettled was unsettled. Ambrata had been taking the galaxy's children for a very long time, quietly, 3 systems from anywhere, and no one had come, because no one had known, and the ones who might have known had not looked. The question came up the chain fast because it had to, and it reached Osai on the flag bridge inside the hour. The folds held others. The operation's warrant, such as it was the recovery of human children. What did the recovery teams do with the rest? Osai did not take an hour to answer. He did not take a minute. All of them, he said. Every cradle. I don't care whose young are in them. We did not come out here to empty the human racks and walk past a gallery full of somebody else's children breathing 4 times a minute behind the same glass. That is precisely the thing that was done to us. The looking away, the not my affair, the somebody else's problem that let the folds run for a century in the dark. We are not going to stand in a Coriad prison and reproduce the exact indifference that built it. His voice did not rise. Empty every gallery, human and not, log every one. And get me the species registries, because every child in those racks has a kind, and every kind is going to get its young back from a human ship, in daylight, on the record, so that the whole galaxy sees what the difference is between a people who cage children and a people who empty the cages they find, whoever's children are in them. Voss emptied every gallery at Ambrata. So did the teams at the other folds once the word spread, and the white ships that came home carried, alongside the human children, the lost young of a dozen kinds, the 41 Valaki juveniles from Ambrata's oldest blocks chief among them, children taken across 2 centuries from a people who had written, we did not know beneath the very first feed, and now learned exactly how much they had not known. Voss carried a Valaki juvenile out of the 3rd gallery herself, in her own arms, a small 6-limbed shape that weighed almost nothing, and she thought, in the 2-sentence space the fleet allowed for thinking, that this was the part the assemblage would never have predicted and would never understand, that the humans, given a prison full of other species' children, would not calculate whose recovery they were and were not owed. They would just carry them all out. It was not in the plan. It did not need to be. It was simply what you did when you found a child in a cage, any child, and the not doing of it was the whole disease the answer had come to end. 9,041 children. That was the count off the 6 folds when it reconciled, later, against Kane's model. 9,041 human, alive, moving in white ships toward human space, guarded, and beside them the lost young of a dozen other kinds, carried out of the same galleries, bound for homes their own peoples had not known to hope for. But Kane's model had always carried a 7th. Idris Kane found the 7th fold while the 6th was still surrendering, and finding it nearly cost more than all the rest. The warrant code with no location had sat at the bottom of his model for 6 weeks like a stone he could not lift. Every other fold had a routing path, a clearinghouse trail, a place the haulers went. The 7th had only a warrant code, a schedule of consignments, and no destination anywhere in the assemblage's freight system, which meant the rota moved its most valuable holding by a method that never touched a clearinghouse. And a thing that never touches a clearinghouse is a thing an intelligence analyst cannot find by pulling routing tables apart. So Kane stopped looking for where the haulers went and started looking for where they came back empty. A hauler that delivers to a fold returns light. A hull's mass signature going out and coming back told you it had delivered something, even when the manifest lied about what. Kane pulled 6 weeks of transit mass telemetry across the whole Coriad frontier and looked for the ghost route, the haulers that left heavy on the 7th warrant code schedule and came back light from a direction with no registered fold in it. It took him 30 hours, and it resolved to a volume of empty space beyond the Halkthryth verge, a place with no star worth naming, where the mass ghosts converged and vanished. It's not a station, Kane told Osai on a strained relay to the avowal's flag bridge, his voice thin with 2 days without sleep. There's nothing there to build a station on and nothing to hide it behind, which means the seventh fold isn't a place. It's a ship, a mobile fold. They kept their most valuable holding on a hull that never stops moving, that never touches a clearing house, that can run the moment any of the fixed folds falls. He put the ghost track on the relay. And Admiral, it's already running. The mass ghost stopped converging 11 hours ago. The seventh fold got the word when Usser Deep fell, and it ran. Osei was quiet for a moment. How many aboard? The seventh warrant code carried the highest grade consignments, the rare ones, the ones the waiting lists span decades for. Kane's voice did something then that it had not done in 6 weeks of building the model cold. I think it's the ones closest to integration, Admiral. I think the seventh fold is where they kept the children who were next. How many? Osei said again. 1,400, Kane said. Give or take. On a ship built to run, with a warden prior who has every reason to void the galleries the instant we get close, and an 11-hour head start into a volume with no jump lanes to funnel it. If it reaches the deep choriid interior, it disperses into 100 systems we'd need a decade to search, and it integrates the 1,400 one at a time while we search, and we never see any of them again. On the flag bridge of the avowal, Osei looked at the ghost track, at the mobile fold running for the deep dark with 1,400 children who were next, and he made the call that turned the recovery into a chase. Detach the fastest thing we have, he said, Cantor's hull. Vance Element is done at Usser. The galleries are held and the follow-on ships can carry the children home without her. I want Meridian's Grace and the 2 fastest cordon escorts on that ghost track inside the hour, running it down. He turned to Idaho. And bring me a choriid who knows where that ship is going. The warden prior of Usser Deep tried to void 3,000 children. He's going to spend the rest of his life explaining himself to a human court either way. Let's find out whether he'd like to start by telling us the mobile fold's run pattern, or whether he'd like us to find it ourselves, and let the record show he chose to let 1,400 more be lost rather than help. He's 9 centuries settled, Idaho said. He won't break. He doesn't have to break, Osei said. He has to calculate. That's the one thing his kind are always doing. Show him the feeds. Show him the Sarek Treaty collapsing and the Valaki text and the whole galaxy watching his caste explain the word settled. Then ask him what the Rhoda looks like in a year and whether the 1,400 are worth being the last thing it ever did. He turned back to the ghost track. They calculate. It's the coldest thing about them. Let's make the calculation come out our way for once. They put the warden prior of Usser Deep in a bare room aboard the avowal's flag hull, and they let Ellen Marsh be the one to sit across from him, because she had asked, and because the legal officer Dissane had judged that the boarding officer who found the first container had earned the right and would not lose her composure, and he was correct on both counts. The warden prior's plates had gone the dull gold of 9 centuries. Bound, he retained the serenity that had not left him even when 5 humans hauled his reaching limb short of the plate. He regarded Marsh across the bare table the way an old scholar regards a persistent student. You are the one from the Syndral hauler, he said through the box. The record names you. You opened container 9. I did, Marsh said. 216 in that container, the warden prior said. Grade 2, Syndral salvage. I remember the consignment. It passed through Usser Deep's manifest before I forwarded it. You have been carrying that number for 6 weeks. I can see it on you. It has changed the shape of your face. The jaw ticked slow. I do not say this to wound you. I say it because I am trying to understand your species and you are a useful specimen. Your kind carries the young this way. As if each one were a whole world lost. It is inefficient. It is also, I am beginning to grasp, the thing we failed to price into the warrant. Marsh did not rise to it. Dissane had briefed her. He calculates, he does not feel. You will get nothing by making him feel because he cannot. You get things by changing his arithmetic. So she did not tell him what she thought of him. She put a screen on the table between them and she played him the feeds. She played him the Sarek Assembly suspending the Friendship Treaty. She played him the Valaki text. We did not know. We know now. She played him a dozen alien networks carrying, in daylight, the footage of wardens spreading their limbs across the cradles, and the recovery teams choosing the hard way around every child, and a woman named Vasquez driving a maintenance seal closed with her own weight, while two of her team stayed on the wrong side of it. She played him the galaxy, watching, recalculating, arriving at its number. This is what the answer is doing, Marsh said. Not to your ships, to your caste. In a year the rota will not be a thing the assemblage is embarrassed by. It will be the thing the whole galaxy agrees it was right to end. Every species with a screen has watched what settled means. There is no venue left where the warrant is lawful, because the only law that ever protected it was the agreement of others not to look, and everyone is looking now, and no one is going to stop. She let the feeds run under her words. Your fixed folds are gone. Your wardens are bound. The apparatus is being taken apart on camera. The only open question left is the seventh fold, the ship that runs, and the 1400 aboard it. The warden prior was silent for a while, watching the Sarek Treaty collapse on loop. You want the run pattern, he said. I want the 1400, Marsh said. The run pattern is how I get them. And if I give it to you, the mobile folds warden prior voids the galleries the moment your ship closes, and the 1400 are lost anyway, and I have gained nothing by helping you but the record of having helped. The old Koryid tilted his head. You understand I am calculating. Dissane told me you would be. Marsh leaned forward. So calculate this. Right now the record of your caste is a crime the galaxy watched. That's fixed. You can't change it. But there's a second record being written, the one about what each of you did at the end when it was over and you knew it was over. The warden prior at Halkthryth Low surrendered his galleries. That's on the record now. He'll answer for the 11 years like all of you, but the last thing he did was choose the living children, and the galaxy watched him do it. You reach for the plate. That's on your record too. The galaxy watched that. She held his gaze, or the place a human holds when a Koryid has no eyes to meet. The mobile fold is the last page. You can be a warden prior who helped bring back the last 1400, or you can be one who let them run into the dark to be integrated one at a time rather than give up a run pattern that's worthless to you now. That's the whole calculation. It's not about mercy. You don't have any. It's about which record you'd rather be the last line of. The warden prior watched the feeds a while longer. 9 centuries of settled certainty did the cold arithmetic, and Marsh sat still and let it, because Dissane had been right, and the only thing that would move this creature was its own ledger, and the ledger had just been shown a column it had never had to consider. The mobile fold runs on a fractal pattern keyed to the Halkthryth verge, the warden prior said at last. It does not flee in a line. It loops, to stay within reach of a fold that might yet shelter it until it is certain all the fixed folds are lost. It will not commit to the deep interior until the loop closes. You have perhaps 40 hours before the loop closes and it runs true. The jaw ticked, final. Its warden prior is named Sesk. Sesk is 400 years settled, not 9, and 400 years is young enough to fear. Tell your ship that. A warden prior who fears is a warden prior who hesitates before voiding galleries, because hesitation is what fear buys you. It is the only advantage I can give you. I give it because the second record is the only thing I have left to write, and you have persuaded me I would rather it said this than the other thing. Marsh stood. It'll be on the record that you told us, she said, in daylight where the galaxy can see. Yes, the warden prior said. That is the point, is it not? That is the whole shape of your answer, everything in daylight. Everything witnessed. You did not come only to take the children back. You came to make it impossible ever again for anyone to not look. A pause. It is a more total thing than a war fleet. I do not think my caste understood until the feeds that this is what you were building. We prepared for warships. We did not prepare to be watched. While Marsh sat with the warden prior, The avowal began the part of the answer the galaxy had been waiting to see, and it did it the way it did everything, which was without hurry and without a wasted shot. The Koread war fleet finally came. Terran, the first voice, 9th century and certain to the end, had summoned it from the ceremonial anchorages where it had sat for generations, and it arrived at the Halkthryth Verge in the old formations, plated dreadnought centuries settled, magnificent and rigid, expecting to meet a frontier polity's improvised response and to teach it the difference in weight between a young species and an old one. It met the avowal instead. Osai did not maneuver. Maneuvering was for fleets that doubted the outcome. He held the avowal in a wall across the verge and let the Koread war fleet come into the range the Corden-class ships owned, and then he had the Corden ships do the thing they were built for on a scale the galaxy had never been permitted to see. They did not fire volleys. They established denials, volumes of space in which a Koread drive could not hold coherence, in which targeting resolved to noise, in which a century-settled dreadnought became a blind and drifting mass. And they walked those denials across the Koread formation the way a hand closes, methodically, one dreadnought at a time, and the capital hulls of the avowal killed what the denials had blinded cleanly, at range, without a single human hull taking a wound that mattered. It was not a battle. Anand, watching the feed she did not narrate, understood that this was the thing the assemblage had never grasped, and the galaxy was now grasping in real time, that the humans had not built a fleet to fight the Koread war fleet. They had built a fleet to make the Koread war fleet irrelevant, and the difference between those two things was the difference between a duel and a demolition. The old dreadnoughts died in their beautiful rigid formations, blind, unable to close, unable to flee, and it took the avowal 4 hours, and in those 4 hours Osai's fleet did not once break formation, or raise its rate of fire, or do anything a watching species could mistake for rage. It was the coldest thing anyone had ever broadcast. It was grief that had been machined into procedure. And every species with a screen watched a 9th century empire's proudest fleet be taken apart by a young species that did it the way a surgeon works, and did the arithmetic, and understood that the disproportion was not an accident of the human's capability but a deliberate message about it, and that the message was, we could have done this at any time. We chose to do it now, because of the children, and only because of the children, and you should all take very careful note of the sequence. When the war fleet was gone, Osai turned the avowal toward the Rota's worlds, the shipyards where the folds were built, the facility at the heart of Koread space where the integration was performed, the apparatus that turned held children into an elder's renewed capacity to form. He did not glass a planet. That was not the answer either. A glassed planet was rage, and rage killed the innocent along with the guilty, and the answer had been designed from the first hour to be the opposite of rage. He took the shipyards apart with precision, hull by hull, drydock by drydock on camera, and he landed forces at the integration facility and seized it intact and let the galaxy see what was inside it, the apparatus and the records and the waiting lists that span decades. And then he ended the apparatus and preserved the records, because the apparatus was the crime and the records were the evidence, and a cold answer keeps the evidence. The Rota ended not in fire but in documentation, every warden prior bound and recorded, every fold emptied. Every waiting list elder who had queued for the renewal of his capacity to form named on a record the galaxy could read. The capacity itself, the whole grim engine of it, removed from the galaxy, methodically, in daylight, with nothing hidden. It took the avowal 3 days. It would take the Koread assemblage the rest of its existence to recover from having been watched. Cantor ran the ghost track for 31 hours, and in the 32nd it found the loop. Meridian's Grace and its 2 Corden escorts had gone out from Usser Deep at the fleet's limit of speed, following Kane's mass ghost and the Warden Prior's fractal pattern, into a volume of the Halkthryth Verge so empty it had never been given a proper name. Cantor did not think of the pursuit as a chase, because a chase implied the prey knew the shape of the thing behind it, and the mobile fold did not. It knew that the fixed folds were falling. It did not know that a 9th-century warden prior had handed the humans its run pattern, or that a young species had built a ship mind patient enough to walk a fractal loop inward turn by turn until the loop closed on its center. "The loop is tightening," Cantor told Vant, who had refused to be left behind at Usser and had transferred her flag to Grace for the pursuit. "Sesk is holding within reach of the fixed folds longer than doctrine advises. The warden prior at Usser was correct. Sesk is 400 years settled, not 9, and a 400-year mind still hopes. It hopes one of the fixed folds will hold and give it somewhere to run to. It has not yet accepted that they are all gone." "When it accepts it," Vance said. "When it accepts it, the loop closes and it runs true for the deep interior, and we lose it," Cantor said. "The warden prior gave us 40 hours. We are at 31. We have perhaps 9 hours before Sesk understands there is nowhere left to run to and stops hoping." "Then we reach it before it stops hoping," Vance said. Cantor cut inside the loop. It was the maneuver Cantor had been holding in reserve, because it was the one that spent their margin. The fractal loop had a geometry, and a ship that understood the geometry could stop following the pattern and instead cross the chord of it, sacrificing the safety of the trailing position for the chance to arrive ahead of the prey rather than behind it. If Cantor read the loop correctly, Grace would come out of its cut directly across the mobile fold's path. If Cantor read it wrong, Grace would come out into empty space, and the loop would close and the 1400 would be gone. Cantor ran the geometry 4,000 times in the time it took Vant to finish saying "cut inside the loop," and told her the odds, and she said "do it," and Cantor did it. Grace came out of the cut with the mobile fold 11,000 kilometers off its bow, and for the first time, the 7th fold saw the thing that had been following it. It was not a station. Kane had been right. It was a hull, long, dark, unmarked, built for running and nothing else. No galleries visible from outside, because the galleries were buried at its core behind the drives and the armor. 1,400 children carried in the most protected volume of a ship designed to disappear. It saw Grace and the 2 cordon escorts resolve across its path, and it did the thing a 400-year mind does when hope finally dies. It stopped hoping, and it committed, and it did both at once. "Sesk has seen us," Cantor said. "It is running true for the interior." And the pause was a quarter of a second, an eternity. "The void configuration is arming. It has decided. It will void the galleries rather than be taken. Vant, we have minutes." "The cordon escorts," Vance said. "Box it. Kill its drive coherence the way the avowal did the war fleet. Blind it and slow it." "Blinding it does not stop the void protocol," Cantor said. "The void protocol is internal. It does not require the drive. If Sesk voids the galleries, boxing the ship only gives us a slower corpse to board." Cantor put the problem on the bridge in the pale amber it used instead of red. "We cannot fire on it. The children are at its core, in the line of any shot that would disable it. We cannot let it run. It disperses into the interior. And we cannot frighten it into voiding by closing too fast. It is the warden prior's calculation again, at speed. Sesk fears. A frightened warden prior hesitates. Our only path is to reach the void controls before the hesitation ends." "Then we board a ship running at flank," Vance said. "Sood." "Here," Sood said, already in the lock, already in the soft entry gear that had held 3,000 cradles safe at Usser. His team assembled behind him because they had not stopped moving since the pursuit began. "You've done this once," Vance said. "You're going to do it again harder, on a hull that's running and knows we're coming and has its hand on the switch. Cantor's going to match velocity and put you on its spine. You go in, you go for the void controls, and you get to Sesk before Sesk stops hesitating. Everything we've learned about how they calculate, everything the warden prior gave us, Sesk is 400 years and it's afraid, and afraid buys you seconds. Spend them." "Copy," Sood said. Cantor, match us up. Let's go get the last 1400. What followed was the hardest single hour of the entire operation, and the galaxy watched all of it, because the recorders on Grace and the cordon escorts fed the same unedited channel, and Anand let it run without a word. Cantor brought Meridian's Grace alongside a hull running at flank speed and matched it, a white rescue ship pacing a black runner across the empty verge, close enough that Sood's team could cross on tethers to the mobile fold spine. They crossed. Two of them did not make the crossing clean, a tether fouled, a body tumbled, and a cordon escort had to break off and recover them, which it did, because the rule that had governed the whole operation held even here. The recovery force spent itself to save, and did not abandon its own to reach the objective faster. Sood and the rest reached the spine and cut their way in and found the same architecture buried at the ship's core, cradles racked in the most protected volume, 1,400 children breathing 4 times a minute inside a ship built to run them into the dark. And they found Sesk at the void controls, and Sesk was afraid. The warden prior of Usser Deep had been right. 400 years was young enough to fear, and Sesk, watching 6 armored humans come through the spine toward its controls, hesitated 1 heartbeat, 2. The hesitation of a mind that had committed to voiding the galleries and now, with the humans actually here, actually reaching, found the certainty harder to hold than it had been in the abstract. It reached for the void plate and it stopped, half-reaching, calculating, and the calculation was the thing that killed it, because a 9th-century mind would have voided the galleries the instant it committed, and a 400-year mind flinched, and in the flinch Sood crossed the last distance. He did not kill Sesk, the rule held here too. He got a hand on the reaching limb and hauled it short of the plate, the way he had hauled the warden prior of Usser Deep, and his team came in around him and pinned the warden prior away from the controls, and Adami went to the interface with Cantor in her ear and began to disarm the void protocol 1 contact at a time, exactly as she had at Usser, while a ship built to run carried them all deeper toward an interior they could not be allowed to reach. Cordon escorts have the drive, Cantor said. Coherence failing, the ship is slowing. It cannot reach the interior now. Adami, the void protocol, that is the only thing left that can lose them. I have it, Adami said, her voice flat. Vance register, the register that held. Cantor, walk me. Amber plate lower left, same as Usser. The geometry is mirrored on this hull, Cantor said. Amber plate lower right. Hold it 3 seconds when you reach it. Sesk built this ship to run, not to be boarded. The void interface is the same Rota design. You know it. Go. Sesk, pinned, spoke through Sood's translator in a voice that had none of the Usser warden prior's serenity, a voice that was 400 years old and afraid, and for the first time in the whole operation, something that a human could recognize as pleading, though it was not pleading for mercy. It was pleading with its own arithmetic, trying to make the numbers come out a way that let it keep the stock. You cannot take them into human space, Sesk said. They are the highest grade. The waiting lists decades, the elders who are queued. You do not understand what you are undoing, the value, the... I understand exactly what I'm undoing, Sood said, holding the limb, not looking at the interface because he trusted Adami the way he trusted the rule. I'm undoing a waiting list. Adami. Amber plate, Adami said, holding 1, 2, 3. Void protocol is dead, Cantor said, and the whole bridge of Meridian's Grace and the flag officer aboard it, and the analyst 30 light-years back who had found the ghost track, and the correspondent who had let the feed run without a word, and the whole watching galaxy exhaled at once. The 7th fold is secure. 1,406 cradles, all held. All alive. Sood let go of Sesk's limb and stood in the buried core of a ship built to run, surrounded by 1,406 children who had been next, who had been the ones the elders were queued for, who would now instead grow old enough to be settled into whatever people they had always been going to be. And he keyed his team, and he said the thing Vant had taught them all to say, flat, the register that held. "Start the count," he said. "Every cradle, every face. We're taking them home." The concordant table met in a glass-domed chamber on the assemblage's oldest world, daylight pouring through the dome onto a floor that had held Choriad power for 2,000 years, and the human who walked into it to deliver the terms was 30 years old and had never in her life addressed a body of this weight. Her name was Inez Calderon, and she was a deputy envoy because the senior envoys had all been on the wrong side of the frontier when the folds fell, and because someone in the fleet had decided that the person who delivered Earth's terms to the concordant table should be young, should be the generation that would have to live in the galaxy this answer was making, and should stand alone before 9 centuries of settled certainty and not be moved by it. Calderon walked to the center of the daylit floor with a single aide and a recorder drone, and the recorder drone fed the same channel that had carried everything else, so that the galaxy watched the terms delivered the way it had watched the crime and the answer. Terran, the first voice, addressed her first, from the raised seat that had held first voices for 2 millennia. 9th century, settled and rigid and certain even now, even with the war fleet gone and the road abound and the folds emptied, because a 9th century mind does not update, it endures. "You are very young," Terran said, "to carry your species' voice into this chamber. I will speak plainly to you as one speaks to the young. Your fleet has done a great violence. You have destroyed a lawful institution, killed the crew of a war fleet that came to defend our sovereign space, and seized property acquired under a warrant older than your presence in this arm. You have done this loudly, before the whole galaxy, in a manner calculated to shame us. I acknowledge that you have the strength to have done it. Strength is not the same as right. When the shock of the feeds fades, the older species of this galaxy will remember that law was broken by the human worlds, not by us, and the account will not read the way you imagine it reads today." Calderon let him finish. Then she was quiet for a moment, long enough that the chamber understood she was not afraid of the silence, and when she spoke her voice was not raised, because Earth's answer had never once been delivered in a raised voice. "First voice," she said, "I'm not here to argue the law with you. You'd win. Your warrant is older than us, and it's lawful under your concordant law, and there is no venue in your system where I could stand and prove otherwise, and you have offered my species an appointment in 9 years to try, and we both know what the 9 years were for." She let that land. "So I'm not going to argue the law. I'm going to tell you what's true instead, and then I'm going to tell you the terms, and then I'm going to leave, because there is nothing here to negotiate." She turned slowly, so that she addressed not only the raised seat but the whole daylit chamber, and the galaxy beyond it. "What's true is that for 11 years your rota took human children," Calderon said. "It took them from the wreckage of our losses, and it called them salvage. It held them in cages it called folds, in a state it called gentle, on a schedule it called merciful, and when their turn came it consumed their minds to renew the capacity of your elders to change. 1,400 of them were the ones you kept for last, the highest grade, the ones your waiting list spanned decades to reach. We have them now. We have all of them, every child your system held on the day we came, 9,041 from the fixed folds and 1,406 from the ship you built to run, 10,447 children, alive, counted, named, on their way to worlds where they will be allowed to grow up." Her voice did not change. "That's what's true. And every species with a screen has watched it be true in daylight from your own records, and there is no argument you can make in this chamber that survives contact with the feed. You keep telling me the account won't read the way I imagine. First voice, the account is already written. The galaxy wrote it while your war fleet was still forming up. You just haven't read it yet." Terran did not answer at once. 2,000 years of concordant power sat around him in the daylit chamber and did not answer either, because they had all watched the feeds, and they had all done the arithmetic, and the arithmetic had come out the same everywhere it was done. "The terms," Terran said finally. 3, Calderon said. The rota is abolished, not reformed, not suspended, abolished. Its warrant void across every system the assemblage reaches, and the abolition entered in your permanent record where the galaxy can read it. That's the first term, and it's already done. We did it ourselves 3 days ago, but you'll enter it in the record so it stands in your law and not only in ours. She held up a second finger, a human gesture the translators did not need to render because the chamber understood counting. Second, every record of the folds, every manifest, every warrant, every waiting list, every name of every elder who queued for an integration is preserved and made open, not sealed, not buried, open permanently to every species and to us, so that the account can never be unwritten, so that in 200 years no Coriad scholar can tell you're young that it was exaggerated, that the humans lied, that it was not really as it was shown. The evidence stands in daylight forever. That's the second term. And the third, Terran said. Calderon lowered her hand. The third term isn't for you, she said. The third term is for the galaxy, and I'm delivering it here because this is where the galaxy is watching. So hear it, all of you. She turned again to the dome, to the daylight, to the recorder drone and the 6 alien networks and the 40 million human screens and every species that had recalculated its arithmetic in the last 6 days. Earth has one message, and it stands from today. We are not going to police your law. We are not going to sit at your tables and object on your schedules. We looked away for 11 years because we didn't know, and 10,000 children paid for the years we didn't know, and we are never going to not know again. So this is the whole of it. Take a human child and we will come, not to a table, not on a schedule. We will come the way we came to Usher deep in daylight in full view, and we will take back what you took, and we will end the thing that took it, and we will make the whole galaxy watch us do it. That's not a threat. A threat is a thing you might not do. This is a description. You've seen it now. You know exactly what it looks like. There is nothing left to imagine. She let the silence hold. That's the third term. It's the only one that matters. The other two are just paperwork. She turned and walked out of the daylit chamber, alone, the way she had come in, and behind her the concordant table sat in the pouring daylight and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the galaxy had not already heard, and the recorder drone followed her out and kept feeding. And the last thing the galaxy saw of the chamber where Coriad power had sat for 2,000 years was a 30-year-old human walking away from it without looking back. The trials came after, and they were the slowest part, and Anand covered every day of them, and they mattered more than the fleet. The wardens were tried in daylight on the record, before a joint body the human worlds convened, and 11 other species chose to sit on, which was itself a thing that had never happened before, 11 species agreeing to sit in judgment together, because the feeds had made it impossible for any of them to sit it out. The warden prior of Usher Deep testified. He did not recant. He explained in his settled voice the warrant and the folds and the words settled and the arithmetic of integration, and he did it knowing that his explanation was the evidence, that every clarifying sentence he offered nailed the account down harder, and he offered them anyway because a 9th century mind would rather be precisely understood than mercifully misremembered. Anand broadcast all of it. She still did not narrate. She had learned in the weeks since the first feed that the thing she was for was to hold the camera steady on the truth and let it do its own work, and the truth did its work. By the end of the trials, there was not a species in the reachable volume that did not know exactly what the rota had been, and exactly how the human worlds had answered it, and the two facts stood next to each other in the permanent record, in daylight, forever, which was the only monument Earth had ever wanted. The assemblage did not fall, exactly. 9th century empires do not fall in a season. But the friendship treaties fell, one after another, the Sarek first and then the others, and the trade agreements were not renewed, and the younger Coriad, the ones who had not queued for integration, who had grown up assuming the folds were a distant lawful thing they need not think about, watched the feeds of their own elders explaining settled, and did their own arithmetic, and something in the Choriad young set against something in the Choriad old. And that fracture would do more to end the thing the Rota had been than any fleet could. Terran, the first voice, 9th century and certain to the end, did not live to see it resolve. He was, the record noted without comment, among the elders whose names appeared on the preserved waiting lists, queued for a renewal of his capacity to form that would now never come, and a mind that cannot form and cannot be renewed simply endures until it stops. And Terran stopped, still certain, still not understanding, in a galaxy that had finally looked. Lieutenant Mara Quist had trained for burns and blast trauma and decompression, and instead she spent the months after the folds learning how to wake a child who did not know it had been asleep. She was 28, a fleet medic assigned to the Solace ship Antiphon, and when the recovery ended, she found herself in charge of a waking protocol that no medical service in human history had ever needed, because no human had ever before had to bring 10,000 children up out of a stasis they had entered as long as 11 years before, some of them so young when they were taken that they had no memory of anything but the field. The Choriad had held them gentle, in their word. The bodies were intact, unharmed, preserved. But a body is not a child, and a child that goes under at 4 and comes up at 4 having lived 11 years as stored potential comes up into a galaxy that has moved on without it, into a body that is still 4 in a year that is not, into a silence where a mother's voice should be. Quist's protocol was built on one principle, and it was the same principle that had governed the fleet, carried into the medical bays and turned inside out. The fleet had been cold so that it could be precise. The waking would be gentle so that it could be complete. Same discipline, opposite face. No child came up alone. No child came up to a Choriad voice or a machine voice or a stranger's. Every waking had a human face over it and a human hand in it and a human voice saying the same first words, in whatever the child's home language could be determined to be, chosen because they were the truest short sentence anyone could think of. You're safe. You're awake. Someone came for you. Most of them had no one to come for them, but the someone in the room. That was the part Quist had not been prepared for, the part no one had been prepared for, though Kane's model had implied it and the manifests confirmed it. The Choriad took children from loss events, transit failures, containment collapses, epidemic evacuations. The children survived the loss events. Their families mostly had not. That was the grim mechanism of the whole thing. The Rota harvested where humans died, and it took the small survivors from the wreckage of the dead, and so the overwhelming majority of the 10,447 had no home left to be returned to, no mother whose voice should have been the first they heard, no family waiting at any port. They had been taken from the edge of one catastrophe and delivered from the edge of another, and between the two they had lost the world twice. Humanity took them all. There was no debate about it that Quist ever heard, and she thought later that the absence of debate was the most human thing she had witnessed in the whole affair, more than the fleet, more than the terms delivered in the Dalit chamber. The ships that came home carried 10,000 orphans of a crime, and the human world simply opened to them, methodically, at scale. The same cold competence that had built the avowal turned now to the problem of 10,000 children who needed everything. Worlds took allotments. Families were matched. The children with living relatives, a few thousand, traced through the genetic registries, cousins and grandparents and the occasional miraculous surviving parent, were reunited with a care that made the reunions almost unbearable to witness. And Quist witnessed many, and did not look away, because she had decided that looking away was the thing the Choriad had counted on, and she would not give them even that. And the children with no one, the majority, were not warehoused and were not processed and were not called anything but children. They were placed, every one of them. It took years. The human worlds did it anyway and did not congratulate themselves for it, because you do not congratulate yourself for the floor. And then Quist learned that not all of the cradles had held humans. It came out during the emptying of the fixed folds, when the counts were reconciled against the manifests, And it should not have been a surprise, because a warrant over unsettled minds does not distinguish by species, but it landed as a surprise anyway. The folds held others. Not many, next to the human count. The human program was the recent and exceptional one, the yield the rota prized, but the older warrant had been taking the young of other species for far longer than 11 years, and the galleries held cradles that were not sized for humans, small shapes of a dozen kinds, some of species the human worlds had barely met, some of species that had sat at the concordant table itself and never known their own lost young were held 3 systems away. Humanity freed them too. That was the decision that Quist thought in the end said the most about what the answer had been. It would have been easy, lawful even by the narrow logic of the operation, to empty the human children from the folds and leave the rest, to say we came for ours, we have ours, the others are not our affair. Nobody said it. The recovery teams that emptied the galleries emptied all of them, human and not, and the solace ships carried every child of every species out of the folds, and the human worlds undertook, methodically and at their own cost, to identify each one and return it to its kind. Some of the species wept in their fashions when their lost young came home in human ships. Some of them had not known. The Valaki, who had written "We did not know, we know now" beneath the first feed, received 41 of their own young out of the fold at Ambrata, children taken across 2 centuries, and the Valaki response to the human worlds was a single line again, and the translators rendered it. You came for your own, and you carried ours out with them. We will not forget which. That was the thing the assemblage had never understood, and the galaxy was only now learning. The humans had not come to the folds for vengeance, though the ending of the rota looked like vengeance and was witnessed as vengeance and served vengeance's purpose. They had come for the children, all the children, and the vengeance was only the cost of making sure they could never be taken again. The disproportion the whole galaxy had watched, the 41 capital hulls and the shattered war fleet in the dismantled shipyards, was not the answer. It was the price of the answer. The answer was 10,000 human children in white ships, and 41 Valaki young, and the lost small shapes of a dozen kinds, all of them carried home, all of them going to grow up. Ellen Marsh rowed the frigate home with the children from Container 9, because she had asked, and because after Usser and the 7th fold and everything between, no one had the standing to tell the boarding officer who found the first container that she could not see the last of it through. 216 from Container 9, 4,109 from the hauler. She had counted them in the corridor with her back against the cold bulkhead, and she had guarded them through the interviews and the feeds and the terms delivered in the Dalet chamber. And now she rowed home with them, and she was there in the medical bay of the frigate when the waking protocol reached the girl with the scrape. The girl was 6. She had been 6 for the whole time, however long the whole time had been. The healed scrape was still on her knuckle, the small proof that somewhere before the loss event that had killed her world and everyone in it, she had fallen off something and somebody had cleaned it and told her she was fine. Quist's protocol brought her up slow, and Marsh stood back and let the medic do the work, because the work was the medic's and not hers. But she was in the room, because she had decided long ago in a cold corridor that she would stand between this child and everything, and she was not going to stop being in the room now. The girl came up out of the field the way they all did, confused, breath-catching, small hands reaching for a world that had rearranged itself around her without her permission. Quist's face was over her, and Quist's hand was in hers, and Quist said the words, in the language the registry had matched to the girl's genetic profile, the truest short sentence anyone had been able to think of. "You're safe," Quist said. "You're awake. Someone came for you." The girl looked up at the human faces over her, in a bright clean bay full of the quiet sounds of other children being brought up gently all around her, and she did not understand any of it, and she asked the only question a 6-year-old has for a room full of strangers, which was where her mother was. Marsh had known the answer to that question for months, and it was the worst answer there was, and she had thought, standing in the cold corridor with her back against the bulkhead, that she would never find a way to be in a room where a child asked it. But Quist was ready for it, because Quist's protocol had been built by people who had thought about exactly this, coldly, in advance, the way the whole answer had been built, thinking through the worst thing before it happened so that when it happened there would be a human ready with the right hand and the right voice. Quist did not lie. The protocol did not permit lying. The children had been lied to enough, called salvage and stock and settled, and the one thing the human worlds had decided they would never be told was a comfortable untruth. "Your mother isn't here," Quist said, gently holding the small hand. "I'm so sorry she isn't here, but you're not alone. You're never going to be alone again. There are a lot of us, and we came a long way to find you, and every single one of us is going to make sure you're taken care of for as long as it takes, for always. That's a promise. Do you understand? For always." The girl did not understand, not really, not yet. She was 6 and she had lost the world twice, and the understanding would come slowly across years, with help, in a home that did not exist yet but would. But she held Quist's hand, and she looked around the bright bay at the human faces and the other waking children, and something in her small, frightened body decided, provisionally, that the strangers were not the field and were not the box, and were not the gray-plated shapes that some deep part of her might half remember, and she stopped asking, and she let herself be held. Marsh stood in the back of the bay and watched, and did not break, because Vant had taught the whole fleet the register that held, and it turned out the register held here too, in the one place it mattered most. The avowal buried its dead the way it had done everything, in daylight and on the record, and it did not pretend the cost had been small. The fleet that ended the rota had not lost a single hull worth the word to the Koread war fleet. Osai's demolition of the ceremonial dreadnoughts had cost the avowal nothing that mattered, and the galaxy had watched that too and understood the message in it. But the recovery force had bled the whole way. Vant's 30 white ships had gone into 6 defended prisons, and the 7th Folds running hull, and they had gone in soft and unfiring against wardens who used the children as walls. And the price of that rule, the rule that no child died to speed a recovery, had been paid in recovery crews, dozens of them, at the manual seals and the gantry chokes and the void control nodes, spending their own bodies so that the pain stayed intact. Vasquez's too, at Tessel Vaunt, who had chosen to be on the wrong side of the seal. Barrow's man at Usser, who would not fire through the cradle. The 2 who had fouled their tethers boarding the 7th Fold and been recovered alive, and the 4 on other hulls who had not. The recovery force had lost more people freeing the children than the entire avowal had lost ending the empire that took them, and that asymmetry was not a failure of the plan. It was the plan. It was the whole moral architecture of the thing, made of exactly this, that the people who came to save would risk everything, and the risk would fall on them and not on the saved, and the ledger would come out lopsided in precisely the direction that proved what the answer had been for. They read the names in daylight. Vant read them herself on the deck of Meridian's Grace, with Cantor carrying her voice to the whole recovery force and the recorders carrying it to the galaxy, and she read every one, and she did not editorialize, because the names did not need it. And when she was done, she said one thing, flat, the register that held, and it was the only eulogy the recovery force was given, and the only one it wanted. "They died holding a door," Vance said. "On the right side of it, that's the whole of it, that's enough." Idris Kane did not go to the memorial. He was, by then, 3 weeks into the work that would occupy him for the rest of his career, which was the building of the permanent record. The second-term Calderon had delivered in the Dalit chamber, the open and unburiable account of everything the rota had been. He had asked for the assignment. Okuda, who had chosen not to bury the file and had ended her own career doing it, had asked him whether he was sure, whether he understood that it meant living inside the manifests and the warrants and the waiting lists for years, whether he understood what that does to a person. Cain had understood. He had said yes anyway, and the reason he gave Okuda was the truest thing he ever said about himself, that he had found the number, cold, at his wall on Halden Reach, and that a man who finds a number like that does not get to walk away from it afterward and let someone else carry it. He had assembled the estimate that started the war. He would assemble the record that ended the argument. It was the same work, in the end, pulling the truth out of the Choriod's own documents and making it impossible to unknow. And he was the best there was at it. And it was the only penance that fit the crime of having been the one who did the arithmetic first. He built it the way he built everything, cold and complete, with generous error bars where the data ran thin and hard citations where it ran solid. Every fold, every hauler, every warrant number, the routing paths and the clearinghouse stamps and the transit mass ghosts. The 11 years, and the 40 to 60,000 human children the model still said had passed through the system across those years. The 10,447 he had helped bring home, and the vast remainder, the consumed, the integrated, the ones the answer had come too late to save, who existed now only as entries in a record that would stand in daylight forever so that no one could ever say there had been fewer. Cain put every one of them in the record he could account for, by name where a name survived, by warrant code where it did not, and he did not round the number down to make it survivable, because the whole point of the record was that it not be survivable, that it sit in the galaxy's permanent memory exactly as large as it truly was. He finished the first complete edition 14 months after the girl with the scrape woke up asking for her mother, and when it was done, he did not celebrate it. He sat with it for a while, the way he had sat with the estimate at his wall, and then he released it open to every species and every archive, and he understood that he had built the only monument the human worlds had ever wanted, which was not a statue and not a fleet but a fact, held in daylight, that could not be made smaller. Priya Anand broke her silence exactly once, at the very end, and it lasted 90 seconds. She had let the feed run without a word for the whole of it. The recovery, the war fleet, the daylit chamber, the trials. 40 million subscribers and 6 alien networks had watched a galaxy's worth of answer through her camera, and had never once heard her tell them what it meant. And she had come to understand that the silence was the most honest work of her life, because a truth this large did its own explaining, and any voice laid over it was a voice claiming a share of it. But when the last count reconciled, when Cain's record was complete and the last child of the last fold was placed, Anand sat down in the plain chair against the plain wall where she had read the first number, in the same flat voice, and she bookended the thing she had started. 14 months ago, she said, I sat in this chair and I read you a number, 9,000, alive on a schedule. I told you it was the whole story and that it didn't need me, and that was true, and I've tried to honor it since by staying out of the way of what you were watching. She was quiet for a moment. I'm going to read you one more number, and then I'm going to stop, and I'm not going to tell you what it means, because you've watched what it means, all of you, for 14 months and you know. She looked at the camera. 10,447, she said. Alive, home, everyone that was in the folds on the day we came, and 41 Valaki young and the lost children of a dozen other kinds carried out in the same ships and returned to their own. A pause. That's the number now. The first one was 9,000 on a schedule. This one is 10,447 home. That's the distance the answer covered. That's what it was for. She stopped talking a full 4 seconds before the feed cut, the way she had the first time, so that the last thing 40 million people and 6 alien networks saw was a human face saying nothing at all. And then she was gone, and she never broadcast on the subject again. And she did not need to, because the record Cain built said everything that was left to say in daylight forever. The warning was tested 19 months later, because a warning always is, and the testing was how the galaxy learned that Calderon had meant exactly what she said in the daylit chamber, that it was a description and not a threat. The Koread did not test it. The Koread fractured, their war fleet gone and their rota abolished and their young turned against their old, had understood the description better than anyone. They were the ones who had learned it firsthand. The ones who tested it were the Thren, a compact, opportunistic power on the far side of the human sphere, raiders by long habit, who had watched the whole affair from a distance and drawn the wrong lesson from it. They concluded that the human answer had been about the Koread specifically, a settling of a particular account, and that the humans, having spent their fury on the assemblage, would not spend it again. They concluded that the appetite for children the rota had proven existed, the market, the buyers, the value of a young human mind, had not gone away just because one supplier had been ended. And they concluded that a fast, quiet raid on a human frontier settlement, in and out before a response could form, would let them take a small cargo of the valuable thing and sell it into the shadow markets that the rota's fall had left hungry, and that the humans would never trace it, and that even if they did, the warning had been theater and would not be spent twice. The Thren raided a colony called Sefton's Landing and took 311 children. They were wrong about the tracing. Kane's record and the intelligence apparatus that had grown up around it existed now precisely to make sure that no human child was ever again taken without the humans knowing exactly who and exactly where. The whole architecture of never not knowing again, built into the frontier after the folds. The Thren raid was traced inside 40 hours, the buyer's route mapped, the holding site fixed, and they were wrong about the theater. Vant took the recovery force out again, the same white ships, the same rule, the same discipline, and behind her went a detachment of the avowal, smaller than the fleet that had ended the rota because the Thren were smaller than the assemblage, but not smaller in proportion, because the disproportion was the message, and the message had to stay legible. And the whole of it went out on the same channel, in daylight, because the galaxy had to be shown that the description held. It took 6 days. The 311 children came home. The Thren raiders who had taken them, and the holding site, and the shadow market node that had commissioned the raid, were ended, methodically, on camera, and the recovery force spent itself again at the doors the way it had at the folds, and the detachment of the avowal made the consequence total and witnessed. And when it was done, Calderon, Envoy Calderon now, not deputy, did not deliver terms to the Thren, because there was no concordant table for the Thren and nothing to negotiate. But she sat once more in a daylit frame and addressed the galaxy, and she said one thing, and it became the sentence the whole reachable volume learned by heart. 19 months ago I told you it was a description, not a threat, Calderon said. Some of you weren't sure. Now you've seen it twice. It's the same description both times, and it will be the same description every time, for as long as there are human children and anyone foolish enough to take them. We are not going to police your law. We are only going to answer this one thing, and we are going to answer it exactly this way forever. Take a human child and we will come. You've watched us do it twice now. There will not be a third demonstration that teaches you anything the first two didn't. There will only be the coming and the taking back and the ending in daylight where everyone can see. She was quiet for a moment. That's all. That's the whole of the law we care about. The rest of the galaxy's arrangements are your affair. This one is ours. After the Thren, no one tested it again. That was the thing the record showed in the years that followed, not that the galaxy became gentle, because it did not, and not that the old cruelties ended, because they did not, but that a single specific cruelty simply stopped, everywhere at once, because the cost of it had been made total and legible and permanent. The shadow markets that had priced young human minds went cold, because there was no price high enough to offset the description. The powers that had looked away from the rota for 11 years, that had regarded human children as a frontier polity's private grief of no galactic weight, revised their arithmetic and did not revise it back. Species that had never spoken to the human world sent, quietly, through back channels, the coordinates of things they knew, a holding site here, a warrant there, a buyer somewhere, because they had understood that the humans would act on such information and act totally, and that being the one who told was better than being the one who was later shown to have known and said nothing. The never not knowing again that Cain had built became a thing the whole galaxy fed, out of a self-interest that was indistinguishable in its effects from decency. The first coordinates came from the Sarek, of all people, the ones who had spent 2 days calling the original broadcast frontier propaganda before their own assembly, suspended the Coriad Treaty in a single afternoon. A little over 2 years after the folds, a Sarek attaché delivered to a human liaison, without preamble and without asking anything in return, the location of a holding site 3 sectors from any human world, a place the Sarek had known about for a decade and said nothing about because it had not been their affair, and the young held there had not been Sarek young. They were not human either. They were the offspring of a client species the shadow markets had preyed on since long before the Coriad program, a small people with no fleet and no voice at any table, whose lost children had been an open secret that everyone knew and no one carried. The Sarek handed the humans the coordinates because they had watched the avowal empty the folds of every child regardless of species, and had understood that the humans would act on this the way they had acted on Umbrata, and had done the arithmetic that the whole galaxy was now doing, which was that being the one who told was cheaper than being the one who was later shown, in daylight, in Cain's open record, to have known and stayed silent. The humans acted on it. Of course they acted on it. Marsh's squadron drew the recovery, and it went the way they all went, the soft insertion, the rule about the child in the line of fire, the void control node seized before the holding site's keepers could deny what they could not keep, and the small people with no fleet and no voice received their lost young back from a human ship, in daylight on the record, and had no way to comprehend it, because nothing in their history had prepared them for the arrival of a power that would spend its own crews freeing children who were not its own and ask for nothing at the end of it. That recovery was not about human children at all. It was the third term, generalized, the description, extended past the human world's own grief to the whole ugly market the folds had been only one supplier in, and the galaxy noted the extension, and understood that the never not knowing had grown teeth that did not check a child's species before they closed. After that the coordinates came steadily, from a dozen quarters, and the shadow markets that had traded in the young of the voiceless, for longer than anyone had bothered to record found that there was, at last, someone who would come, and the price of the whole filthy trade climbed past what any buyer would pay, and one specific cruelty, and then another and then a category of them, simply stopped. And the avowal did not stand down. That was a deliberate choice, and Osai argued it before the human world's governing bodies in the one address he ever gave in daylight, an old man making the case that the young officers had earned the right to have made. A warning that is a description, he said, only stays a description as long as the thing it describes stays ready. The moment the avowal was broken up, the moment the recovery ships went back to ordinary rescue rotations, and the cordon hulls were mothballed, and the demolition of the war fleet became a story instead of a capability, the description would decay back into theater, and some power on some frontier would draw the wrong lesson the Thren had drawn, and children would be taken again on the bet that the answer had been a one-time fury. So the avowal stayed. It stayed at readiness, cold and complete, a standing fleet whose entire doctrine was the one operation, whose crews trained the soft insertion and the void control seizure and the hand-to-hand around the cradle rack, whose existence was itself the ongoing delivery of the third term. It cost enormously. The human worlds paid it without complaint, year after year, the way they had placed 10,000 orphans without congratulating themselves, because it was the floor, and you do not congratulate yourself for the floor, and you do not tear it up because it is expensive. Ellen Marsh commanded a squadron of it eventually. She had not planned to. She had been a customs boarding officer who opened the wrong container, and she had thought, for a long time after, that she would leave the service when the affair was done, because she had seen the thing that could not be unseen and did not know how to keep standing watch afterward. But the standing between that had begun in a cold corridor with her back against a bulkhead turned out to be a thing she could not put down, and when the avowal became a standing fleet, it needed officers who understood in their bones what it was for, and there were none who understood it better than the ones who had been there at the start. So Marsh stayed and rose and took a squadron, and trained her crews on the rule that Vant had carved into the whole force, that you find another way around the child every time, that you spend yourself and not the saved, that the coldness is the mercy and the discipline is the love. And she carried the girl with the scrape in the back of her mind the whole while. The way Cain carried the number and Anand carried the silence, as the specific weight that kept the abstraction honest. The children became a generation, and that was the answer's last and slowest work. The part no fleet could do and no record could hold. The part that happened one placed child at a time across 2 decades, while the galaxy's attention moved on to other things. Cantor watched more of it than any of them, because a ship mind endures and a human does not, and Meridian's grace stayed in service long after the officers who had crewed it during the folds had risen or retired or been read off a deck in daylight. Cantor carried the fold children in white bays that had been built for the wounded and turned out to serve just as well for the saved, and then Cantor carried, in the years after, the first of the frontier's rebuilt settlements, and the relief runs to worlds the shadow markets had gone cold around, and everywhere it went it kept, in the way a ship mind keeps things, a quiet accounting of what had become of the 10,447, not a file. Cantor had learned from watching Cain the difference between a file and a memory, and this was a memory. It knew that most of them had grown. It knew that some of them had not been able to, that a mind held gentle in a fold for 11 years does not always come up whole, that some of the smallest, the ones taken youngest and held longest, woke into damage no protocol could fully wake them out of, and that the human worlds kept those ones too, cared for them too, for always, exactly as Quist had promised in the Bright Bay, because the promise had not had conditions. It knew that a great many of them had done the ordinary miraculous thing that children do, which is survive their own beginnings and become people, and that some of those people had, in the fullness of the years, come to the fleet. That was the thing Cantor found it could not have predicted, and treasured, in whatever way a ship mind treasures. The fold children grew up, and some of them, grown, chose the avowal. Not many, proportionally. Most of them did the healthiest possible thing and built lives as far from the memory of the field as they could get, and no one begrudged them that, least of all the fleet, which existed precisely so that they would never have to think about the folds again. But some of them could not put it down any more than Marsh could, and they came, and they trained the soft insertion and the void control seizure, and the rule about the child in the line of fire, and they crewed the standing fleet whose whole reason for being was that what had been done to them would never be done to another, and Cantor carried some of them on Meridian's grace and did not tell them it had carried them once before, small and sleeping, out of a Coriad box. Because a ship mind knows the difference between a thing worth saying and a weight worth carrying silently. The girl with the scrape was one of them. She was not called the girl with the scrape, of course. She had a name, which she had been given at the placement that took her in, a family on a green colony world who had wanted a child and been matched with one who woke asking for a mother, and who had spent years earning the provisional trust the girl had extended in the bright bay of the frigate, and had earned it, and had raised her. The scrape had healed into nothing anyone but Marsh would have known to look for. She grew up on the green world, and she was told, when she was old enough, the truth of where she had come from, because the human worlds had decided in the first year that the fold children would never be lied to, not even comfortably, not even about this. And when she was grown, she did the thing that some small number of them did, and she came to the fleet. And because the galaxy is smaller than it looks and a record keeps everything, it was arranged, quietly, without ceremony, because ceremony was not the fleet's register, that her first posting was to a squadron of the standing avowal commanded by the officer who had opened Container 9. Marsh did not tell her. That was Marsh's choice, and Cantor, which knew both their histories, understood it. The girl came aboard as an ensign among other ensigns, and Marsh commanded her the way she commanded all of them, coldly and completely, and with the rule carved into every drill. And if there were moments when the commander's eyes rested a half-second longer on one particular young officer than protocol required, the young officer did not notice, because the young officer was busy learning to find another way around the child in the line of fire, which was the whole of the fleet's craft and the whole of its meaning, and which she learned faster than her peers, though she could not have said why. It was Cantor in the end that told her, and only because she asked. She asked because she was an officer of the Standing Fleet, and officers of the Standing Fleet studied the folds, studied the operation that had made them, the way any service studies its founding action, and she pulled the records the way Cain had taught the whole apparatus to keep them, open and complete, and she found Container 9, and she found the count, and she found. Because Marsh had insisted at the very beginning that every child be documented so completely that no one could ever say the humans had exaggerated. A still image of a girl of 6 with a healed scrape on her knuckle, curled in a trough of gel behind a milky pane, breathing 4 times a minute. And she recognized the scrape, because it was on her own hand, faded to nothing but findable if you knew, and she sat with the image for a long time the way Cain had sat with the number, and Marsh had sat with the count. And then she asked the shipmind who had carried her whether the record was what she thought it was. Yes, Cantor said. It did not soften it. The fleet did not soften things. That was the register that held. Container 9, Syndral Corridor, 216. You were one of them, the officer who opened the container, who declared the Class 1 that began all of it, who is now your squadron commander. She counted you. She stood between you and the corridor with her weapon slung because there was nothing to fight and everything to guard. She has carried you specifically the whole time. She did not tell you because she did not want your service to be a debt. She wanted it to be a choice. It was a choice. You should know that it was also, to her, the closing of a circle she has been inside since before you woke. The young officer was quiet for a long while, in the white bay of a ship that had carried her twice. Does she know I'm the one? She said finally. She has known since your posting was arranged, Cantor said. She arranged it, and then she said nothing and commanded you like any other ensign and let you be an officer and not a rescued child. That was the last gift she had to give you, and it was the hardest one, and it was the most like her. A pause, the quarter-second that was, for Cantor, a held breath. You may tell her that you know if you wish. She will not raise the subject herself. She will stand between you and everything silently for as long as she serves, whether you speak of it or not. That is simply the shape she took in a cold corridor a long time ago. Some shapes do not change. She told Marsh. She chose to after a week of not choosing, and she did it the way the fleet did things, without ceremony, in a working moment, because the fleet's register was the only one either of them fully trusted, and it turned out to be enough. It was after a drill. The squadron had run the soft insertion against a simulated fold for the 9th time that cycle, and the young officer had held the void control node against the simulated warden prior, with a patience that had drawn Marsh's notice, because it was the patience of someone who understood in her body, and not only her training, exactly what the node meant, and exactly what was on the other side of failing to hold it. Marsh had said at the debrief that it was good work in the flat voice, and the young officer had stayed behind after the others filed out, and Marsh had known before she spoke what she was going to say, because Marsh had been waiting for it for a year without letting herself want it. I pulled the founding records, the young officer said, For the study module. Container 9. She did not look away, which Marsh noted because looking away was the thing the whole affair had been built to make impossible, and the girl had learned it without being taught. I found the still, the scrapes on my hand. Cantor confirmed it. You counted me. Marsh was quiet for a moment. 20 years and a fleet's worth of distance stood between the cold corridor and this room, and none of it was enough to make the moment ordinary, and she did not try to make it ordinary. I counted you, Marsh said. 216 in the box. You were near the front on the left, second rack up. You had your fist under your chin. She did not soften it and she did not perform it. She simply gave the girl the truth, complete, the way the fleet gave everything, because the girl had been lied to enough by things that called themselves gentle, and Marsh had promised, silently in a corridor, that she never would be again. I stood in the hatch and I couldn't file what I was seeing. And then I started counting, because counting was the only thing my hands could do. You were a number for about 4 seconds. Then you were a girl who'd fallen off something and had her scrape cleaned by somebody who loved her. And I have not been able to make you a number again since, and I stopped trying a long time ago. The young officer absorbed that. Cantor said you didn't tell me because you didn't want my service to be a debt, she said. It isn't a debt, Marsh said. You don't owe the fleet your life because the fleet came for you. If anything, the fleet owes you the 11 years and it can't pay them, and it stopped pretending it could the day it decided to place every one of you and call it the floor and not a favor. She stood, because the moment had reached its end and the fleet's register did not linger. You're here because you chose it. That's the only reason worth being here. And you're good at it, better than good, because you understand the node in a way I can only teach the others to approximate. That's not a debt either. That's just what happens when someone who was on the wrong side of a pain grows up and decides that no one else is going to be. Carry it in with you. She almost smiled, and did not, because it was not the fleet's register, but the girl saw the place where the smile would have been and understood it. That's the whole reason. It always was. The young officer nodded and picked up her kit and went to find the rest of her cohort, and Marsh stood alone in the debrief room for a moment and let the circle finish closing, and then she went back to the work, because the work did not stop, because the standing fleet's whole meaning was that it did not stop. That was the shape the answer finally took in the long years after the feeds went quiet. Not a monument, not a holiday, not a story the human worlds told themselves to feel large. It took the shape of a girl who had been a number for 4 seconds growing up to hold a node so that no one else would ever be a number at all. It took the shape of Cain's record, open in daylight, exactly as large as the crime had been. It took the shape of a standing fleet nobody wanted to pay for and everybody paid for, drilling the soft insertion against a simulated fold on a cycle that would not end, because the description only stayed a description as long as the thing it described stayed ready. It took the shape of 10,447 placements, and 41 Valaki young carried home in the same ships, and a galaxy that had recalculated its arithmetic and never once revised it back. And it took the shape of a single fact, held in the galaxy's permanent memory, that the assemblage had not believed until the feeds and had never fully understood even then. That the humans had built the most total answer any young species had ever delivered, and had built it not out of rage but out of the refusal to ever again not know, and had made the whole galaxy watch not to boast, but to make the watching itself the wall. Because a crime the galaxy has watched cannot be committed again in the comfortable dark, and the dark had been the only thing that ever made the folds possible. The Choriad had asked, at the very beginning with the whole galaxy listening, what the humans would do. They had asked it certain of the answer, from 9 centuries of settled certainty, and they had been wrong, and the wrongness had cost them their war fleet and their rota and their standing, and in the end, their empire, because a species that cannot form cannot survive being that wrong. They had imagined the humans would file an objection, and wait for an appointment, and be taught the difference in weight between a young species and an old one. Instead, the humans had come, in daylight, in full view, and taken back every child, and ended the thing that took them, and made the galaxy watch every second of it. And then they had built a fleet whose only purpose was to do it again forever, to anyone, without hesitation and without exception. And they had told the galaxy so in the plainest possible words, and then proven the words twice. There was no appointment in 9 years. There was only the description, and the readiness that kept it true, and the record that kept it unburiable, and a squadron commander somewhere on watch who had once counted a girl in a box and could not stop standing between. The assemblage had wanted to know what humanity would do to a species that caged its children. The whole galaxy had watched the answer, in daylight from beginning to end. And the answer was that humanity would take them home, all of them, everyone, whatever it cost and whoever had to pay it, and would end, without mercy and without haste and without a single word raised above the register that held the thing that had dared to call a child settled stock. Not once, not as a fury spent and finished, for always, in daylight, where everyone could see. That was the whole of it, that was enough.